Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Suzanne Morphew. Suzanne Morphew was born on April 11, 1971, to Jean and Adrian Alexandria, and grew up with her two brothers, David and Andrew. Those who knew Suzanne describe her as an intelligent, thoughtful, and caring friend. In 1998, while in high school, she met her future husband, Barry Morphew. After 6 years of dating, they got married. Barry was an exceptional baseball player and was signed with the Toronto Blue Jays. Meanwhile, Suzanne pursued a degree in education at Purdue University. However, Barry's sports career was cut short due to a serious injury, and he switched to a career in horticulture. Suzanne had been teaching for 4 years when Barry started his landscape company, which gradually gained momentum. The couple had 2 children, Mallory and Macy. They lived a picture-perfect life in Indiana until Suzanne was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. Despite beating cancer twice, in 2018, the Morphew family decided to move to Mayville, Colorado, for a fresh start and to be closer to their daughter Mallory, who attended Western State University. They settled into a stunning 7-acre property where Barry could hunt and continue his work as a contractor. He also became a volunteer firefighter. Suzanne retired from teaching and dedicated more time to her church and her new hobby, sports mountain biking. The Morphew family seemed perfect from the outside, but they had their secrets. It wasn't until May 10, 2020, that their problems came to light. That Mother's Day started off like any other at the Morphew residence. Barry and their daughters left the house, leaving Suzanne alone. Barry claimed he had a landscaping appointment in Broomfield, 3 hours away from Mayville by car. Meanwhile, the girls went on a camping trip. Barry and the girls planned to return home that evening to celebrate Mother's Day with Suzanne. However, when they didn't hear back from her, they started to worry. The girls sent her a message to wish her a happy Mother's Day, but got no response. This was unusual, since Suzanne was very active on social media. They expected her to be on her phone, especially since she was supposed to attend her best friend's daughter's wedding and share some photos. After several hours of no response, Mallory and Macy grew concerned and asked their neighbor, Martin Ritter, and his wife to check on Suzanne. Mrs. Ritter went to the Morphew house between 4 and 4:30 p.m. and found it empty. Barry's wife called him to explain the situation, and he advised her to check if Suzanne's mountain bike was still at the Morphew residence. If it wasn't there, he told her to contact the police, which is exactly what she did. The police arrived at the Morphew residence, and Barry, along with his 2 daughters, returned home, eager to learn about Suzanne's whereabouts and condition. A few hours into the search, the police discovered their first significant lead. 2 deputies found Suzanne's mountain bike near a steep ravine, not far from the Murphys' home. This suggested that Suzanne might have been involved in a crash. However, there were no signs of a struggle on the bike or in the surrounding vegetation, and no skid marks indicating that she had used her brakes. Despite the mountain bike being found at the bottom of a ravine with no damage, and no signs of struggle or disturbance to the surrounding vegetation, detectives suspected foul play. When presented with this evidence, Barry's reaction was unusual, and his subsequent explanation that a mountain lion must have moved the bike seemed far-fetched. Many people found Barry's behavior during the investigation into his wife's disappearance to be suspicious. In a private conversation with YouTuber Tyson Draper, Barry elaborated on his mountain lion theory. Notably, he was absent from the search parties organized by Suzanne's brother, Andrew, who was skeptical of Barry's account of the bike ride and suggested that Suzanne might have gone missing on May 9th instead of Mother's Day. As the investigation continued, suspicion shifted to Barry when Suzanne's helmet was discovered 1 mile from their home, precisely in the direction his truck's telemetry showed he had driven that morning. This discovery was particularly incriminating because it was in the opposite direction of the Broomfield construction site, which was his alleged destination that day. During the initial police interview, the suspect claimed he woke up to his alarm clock at 4:30 a.m. and drove directly to the Broomfield construction site. However, the telematic data from his Ford F-350 revealed that he drove 1 mile west before heading to the site. When confronted with this discrepancy, the suspect provided an explanation. He stated that he had gone scouting for elk that morning around 4:30 a.m. and was curious to see which direction they were headed so he could track them down later. He allegedly had a habit of tranquilizing elk and removing their antlers for sale. But when the officers questioned how he could have spotted elk at 4:30 a.m. if he was just waking up, he changed his story. He claimed he didn't set his alarm for 4:30 a.m. and woke up on his own. When questioned about the day of the disappearance, he stated it was one of the best days the couple had had in a while. He said he worked with a co-worker in Salita that morning, returned early, went for a hike with Susan, and then they grilled steak and were intimate together. Barry claimed that he and his wife Suzanne went to bed together, suggesting it might have been the last time they saw each other. However, as we've established, Barry is not a trustworthy witness. When the police investigated, they discovered that Barry had lied about almost everything that occurred that night. The first indication that something was amiss came when investigators reviewed Barry's phone and vehicle data on May 9, 2020. Although Barry and Suzanne did spend the afternoon and evening together, the events didn't match Barry's story. The first significant discrepancy arose between 2:42 and 2:44. Phone records showed Barry making erratic movements around the property. When questioned, Barry claimed he was likely hunting chipmunks with tranquilizers at 2:47 p.m. Then, Barry turned his phone to airplane mode, which remained active until 10:17 p.m. Furthermore, the steak dinner he claimed to have shared with his wife was called into question when investigators found only one dirty dish instead of two. Later that night, more peculiarities emerged on the Morphew property. During their examination of the data, the police found several concerning details that raised suspicions about Barry's activities later that night. At 9:30 p.m., an hour after he claimed to have gone to sleep with his wife, his car was seen reversing backward from the driveway, moving 96 feet. Investigators thought this might be when he loaded her body onto his truck, if he was guilty. The records also showed that between 3:25 and 3:48, the door to his truck opened and closed over 80 times. Although this evidence was circumstantial, it suggested that Barry was not telling the police everything, prompting a closer investigation into the events of May 10th. Further investigation revealed that Barry had no legitimate reason to be in Broomfield that day. His company's contract was not set to start until a week later, so there was no project for him to inspect. Barry claimed that he had only visited the Holiday Inn, the job site, a local store for granola and water, and briefly stopped at McDonald's to clean his windshield. However, surveillance footage obtained by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation contradicted his account. Barry was caught on camera throwing away 5 trash bags near McDonald's and the Holiday Inn. When questioned about it, he gave a suspicious explanation, claiming he was trying to avoid waste disposal fees by cleaning his car himself. However, when officers inspected his car, his story fell apart. A co-worker reported a strong smell of bleach and chlorine in Barry's hotel room a day after Suzanne disappeared. Additionally, investigators found that Barry had changed his clothes multiple times that day. Despite these suspicious actions, the investigators initially found no clear motive for Barry's behavior. But when they dug deeper into their personal lives, they discovered a motive. Barry and Suzanne's daughter revealed that the couple's marriage was not as happy as Barry made it out to be. Text messages on Suzanne's recovered phone and personal belongings proved this. In fact, Suzanne was extremely unhappy in the marriage and talked about how Barry refused to consider divorce. Suzanne kept a list of grievances on her phone, detailing a pattern of physical abuse. She was afraid to be alone in a room with Barry and worried about his drinking. She also suspected him of infidelity and tried to protect her phone from him, fearing he would seize it. On May 20th, when the police searched the Morphew house, they found a pen that Suzanne had bought to catch her husband in the act. Ironically, it recorded her own infidelity, not his. The pen revealed that Suzanne was having an affair with a man named Jeff, a high school acquaintance. The affair allegedly started in 2018 and had lasted for about 1.5 years. Although Jeff seemed like an obvious suspect, the police were able to clear him of any involvement in Suzanne's disappearance. The investigators believed that Barry had discovered Suzanne's infidelity, and that a note she wrote 2 days before she vanished supported this theory. The note indicated that Barry had accused Suzanne of having a boyfriend. The spy pen was crucial evidence, but it was not the only important discovery made during the search of the Morphew house. The police also found a tranquilizer dart cap in the family's dryer, a spent bullet casing in the bedroom, a large crack in the doorframe, and remnants of Suzanne's journal in the fireplace. When combined with telematic data, these findings suggested that Barry might have planned and carried out the murder of his wife, possibly killing her in the afternoon of May 9th, 2020. After texting her boyfriend 53 times and sending a selfie at around 2:10 p.m., Suzanne never used her phone again. It wasn't until 2 weeks later that the public learned Barry was a suspect in his wife's disappearance, when the police conducted a 2-day excavation of a construction site in Salida, one of Barry's job sites. In response, Barry released a strange video proclaiming his innocence. However, he wasn't arrested until May 5, 2021, nearly a year after the investigation began. Although the evidence against Barry was largely circumstantial, the prosecution seemed confident in their case due to his changing stories, repeated lies, and clear motive. Barry was charged with multiple crimes, including first-degree murder of his wife, tampering with physical evidence, possession of a dangerous weapon, and attempting to influence a public servant. Moreover, he was later charged with filing a fraudulent election ballot in Suzanne's name, claiming he didn't know it was wrong and that it would help Trump's campaign. Barry pleaded guilty to this charge and paid a $600 fine. In August 2021, a preliminary hearing was held to determine whether Barry Morse's case would proceed to trial. During this 4-day hearing, the prosecution presented their evidence and proposed a theory of what might have occurred. According to the prosecution, Barry murdered his wife on May 9, 2020, then dismembered her body in a hotel room. He allegedly disposed of the tools used and buried her body in an unmarked grave. However, the defense strongly challenged the prosecution's account, highlighting several inconsistencies. They pointed out that cadaver dogs were unable to detect any human remains in Barry's car or the hotel room where the alleged dismemberment took place. The defense also suggested that the dart bullet cover might have been planted as evidence. Furthermore, they noted visual discrepancies in the photos of the dryer, with one image showing the cap inside the dryer and another image showing it was not present. The defense argued that Barry couldn't have used his dart gun in the alleged murder because it was broken at the time. However, their strongest evidence was the discovery of partial DNA on Suzanne's car and bike helmet that didn't match Barry. This DNA actually matched evidence from 3 unsolved sexual assault cases in Chicago and Arizona, raising reasonable doubt about Barry's guilt. The discovery was significant, but it was only brought up during the hearing because the CBI investigator who collected the evidence went on military leave before following up on the lead. To make matters worse, the defense was never informed about the foreign DNA matches and only learned about them during the hearing. This meant the prosecution had withheld important evidence that could have helped the defense. Throughout the hearing, the defense argued that the presence of another suspect with a criminal record meant the prosecution didn't have enough evidence to convict Barry of killing his wife. They asked the judge to make a quick decision, but surprisingly, he delayed it, citing the large amount of time and resources invested in the case. On September 7th, the judge ruled that the case against Barry would proceed, setting his bail at $500,000. Barry was released from county jail on September 20th, 2021, just 9 days before the trial was scheduled to start. However, in a surprising turn of events, the prosecution suddenly filed a motion to dismiss all charges against Barry without prejudice, allowing them to potentially reopen the case if new evidence emerges. Given the lack of concrete evidence proving Barry's guilt and the prosecution's misconduct, securing a conviction would have been a difficult task. Moreover, the prosecution had missed several crucial deadlines, resulting in sanctions that prevented 14 key witnesses from testifying at the trial. The news of the dismissal shocked the public, and Barry was pictured leaving the courthouse with a wide smile, accompanied by his 2 daughters. On September 22, 2023, investigators unearthed multiple shallow graves in Moffett, Colorado. During an investigation, Suzanne's remains were identified using her dental records and chemotherapy port. Surprisingly, over 50 miles away from the initial search area, focused on the mountains surrounding Barry's property. The discovery of her body raises questions about Barry's potential involvement in the murder. Although the police are certain Barry's truck was not in Moffett on May 9th and 10th, some suggest he could have had an accomplice in disposing of Suzanne's body, allowing him to travel to Moffett, bury the body, and return. If investigators obtained a subpoena for Barry's phone and car data for an extended period, they might be able to link him to the location where Suzanne's remains were found. For now, Barry appears to be cleared of suspicion, but the police and district attorney's office continue to investigate the case. The 12th Judicial District's district attorney told CNN that the case remains open and no further comment can be made until more information becomes available, while offering condolences to Suzanne's family. Barry's lawyer has spoken out strongly since the body was found, suggesting that Suzanne might have been a victim of a serial killer because her remains were discovered in a graveyard with many other bodies. She thinks the police wrongly accused Barry and hopes they will eventually admit their mistake. Meanwhile, Barry has filed a $15 million lawsuit against the prosecutors, sheriff's departments, and investigators, claiming they wrongly accused him of being involved in his wife's disappearance. And welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Emmett Corrigan. Ashley Harmon was a vibrant and intelligent person who experienced a challenging time when her parents divorced at the age of 9. During this period, she took on a maternal role, caring for her 5 siblings and protecting them. Ashley's faith was the cornerstone of her life. As a devout Mormon and a member of the Church of Jesus Christ and the Latter-day Saints, she turned to her faith in God for strength and comfort during difficult times. Her unwavering belief provided her with a sense of peace, resilience, and determination, enabling her to overcome obstacles and face challenges with courage. In 2003, while studying human development at Utah State, Ashley met Emmett, a philosophy student. Emmett, like Ashley, had experienced the pain of his parents' divorce at a young age. However, he found solace in the Mormon faith and was baptized into the Church of Jesus Christ and the Latter-day Saints at 17. Ashley was immediately drawn to Emmett's charm, and he reciprocated her feelings. Emmett was immediately smitten with Ashley's intelligence when they first met, and he quickly realized she was the one he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. He confided in his closest friends about his feelings, and their relationship blossomed over the next few months. During Christmas in 2008, Emmett proposed to Ashley, and to his delight, she accepted. The couple tied the knot in a Mormon temple, surrounded by their shared values and beliefs. The ceremony was a beautiful expression of their commitment to each other and their faith. As newlyweds, Emmett and Ashley were filled with joy and excitement as they began their new life together. Their marriage was built on a foundation of stability and happiness, which is deeply rooted in Mormon values. In the Mormon faith, marriage is considered a sacred and eternal bond that transcends mortal life. While divorce is not entirely ruled out, it is strongly discouraged and only permitted under specific, extreme circumstances. In 2005, Ashley and Emmett had twin daughters, and they were thrilled to start their journey as parents. Emmett loved being a father and cherished every moment with his girls. Ashley was happy to be living the life she always wanted. At the time, they were college students at Utah State University, and they managed to balance school with taking care of their babies. Although they faced challenges, their faith and love for each other helped them overcome difficulties. With determination, they pushed through and worked towards a better future. In 2009, Emmett graduated from Utah State University with high honors, went to law school, and passed the bar exam, becoming a bankruptcy attorney. During this time, Ashley stayed at home to care for their growing family, while Emmett focused on building his career. Ashley Corgan took on the role of managing the household and raising their 4 young children. To outsiders, the Corgan family appeared to have a perfect life, a beautiful home, multiple kids, and a fulfilling career for Emmett. But beneath the surface, things were different. In August 2010, Emmett began to feel overwhelmed by the financial burden of providing for his family of 6. To remedy this, Emmett decided to start his own business, a criminal defense firm. Through a friend, he met Candy Hall, a reputable paralegal with experience in criminal law. The two met for lunch and got along well, leading Emmett to hire her for his firm. Candy was married to Robert Hall, a hard worker and devoted father. When Candy landed the job at Emmett's firm, she was initially thrilled, and her husband and children were happy for her. As the stress of building a business and raising their large family took its toll, Ashley noticed a change in her marriage to Emmett. He was overwhelmed by his responsibilities and saw a release by spending excessive time at the gym, often at inconvenient times that left Ashley to care for their 4 children alone. Despite their growing distance, Ashley and Emmett welcomed their 5th child, a son, on January 15, 2011. However, Emmett's behavior was different from when their other children were born. He began spending more and more time away from home, sometimes staying out overnight. Ashley confided in her sister, expressing her genuine concern that Emmett's activities might be evidence of infidelity. Emmett's assistant, Candy Hall, was facing marital problems similar to Ashley's. Candy confided in a friend that her husband Rob was jealous of her working for the charming Emmett. The constant arguing was putting a strain on their relationship. On March 6, 2011, Ashley and Emmett celebrated their 7th wedding anniversary, but Emmett didn't join her. Instead, he claimed to be at a bodybuilding competition, leaving Ashley to take care of their children by herself. Ashley felt anxious about her marriage, wondering if she was to blame for Emmett's unhappiness. Since divorce wasn't an option, she decided to work on improving their relationship. With a fresh resolve on March 11th, Ashley aimed to restore unity to her home. Ashley was determined to repair her strained relationship with her husband Emmett. She spent the entire day planning a perfect evening, attending to every detail to make it special. She cooked his favorite meal, tidied the house, and reminded the children to be on their best behavior. Ashley set the table and waited for Emmett to arrive home from work at 6 p.m. However, he walked in 2 hours late. When she tried to greet him with a kiss, he turned away, leaving her feeling cold. Despite his aloofness and the growing distance between them, Ashley was resolute in her mission to rekindle Emmett's love for her. She firmly believed that their love was worth fighting for and was willing to do whatever it took to salvage their relationship. 2 hours after she had finished preparing dinner, the family finally gathered around the table to eat. But to Ashley's dismay, Emmett claimed he wasn't hungry. Ashley prepared a meal for her husband Emmett, but he showed little interest, leaving her disappointed and hurt. When he claimed he needed to go to Walgreens, Ashley sensed something was wrong and asked him to stay and talk. Emmett responded harshly and left, leaving Ashley confused and hurt. Meanwhile, Emmett's assistant, Candy, was going through a tough time in her marriage to Rob Hall. That same day, Rob decided to pack his bags and leave their home, marking the end of their relationship. Rob had a strong bond with his loved ones, but he needed space. One evening, Rob asked his daughter if she'd borrowed his ex-wife Candy's car. She said no. Later, she drove past Walgreens, saw Candy's car, and called her dad to let him know. Rob's casual response had a profound impact on two families. Ashley lay awake in bed, her heart filled with worry as she prayed for her marriage to succeed. Despite her efforts to reach him, Emmett wasn't responding to her texts and calls, causing her great unease. Her instincts told her something was wrong, and she felt a sense of dread. Meanwhile, at around 1 p.m., a 911 call reported gunshots and a screaming woman in the Walgreens parking lot. The police responded quickly, unsure of what they would find. They didn't know if it was a random shooting, a botched drug deal, a robbery, or something else. As the first officer approached the scene, he was met with a disturbing sight. A lifeless body on the ground, and another person, wounded and clutching their head in pain. The injured person was rushed to the hospital with a gunshot wound, leaving the police with many unanswered questions. Amidst the chaos, the police were wanted to speak with one woman in particular, Candy Hall, who was present at the crime scene. Candy identified the man in the hospital as her husband Rob, and the deceased man as her boss Emmett. Emmett had suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the head and chest. Shortly after Emmett's body was discovered in the Walgreens parking lot, his wife Ashley received a knock on her door. When she answered, police officers broke the devastating news to her. Her husband Emmett was dead, a victim of a shooting. Ashley was shocked and distraught, unable to fathom what had led to this tragic event. The police then asked Ashley if she was familiar with Rob and Candy Hall. Ashley revealed that she knew Candy as Emmett's assistant, but she had long suspected that the two were having an affair. The police brought Candy in for questioning at the station, determined to piece together the events leading up to Emmett's murder and Rob's shooting. During the interrogation, Candy denied having a romantic relationship with her boss Emmett, and she vehemently rejected any suggestion of intimate relations. According to Candy, she had driven to Walgreens that night solely to pick up a prescription. Candy and Emmett met by chance in a store and decided to take a drive in Emmett's car. During the drive, Candy's phone rang. It was her estranged husband Rob. Candy told Rob she was with Emmett, which sparked Rob's jealousy and led to him making a violent threat against Emmett. After the phone call, Candy and Emmett stopped at a gas station and eventually arrived at Walgreens. When they got out of the car, Candy saw Rob waiting for them, visibly angry. The situation escalated into a heated argument and physical fight between Rob and Emmett. Amidst the chaos, Candy heard 3 loud gunshots and turned to see both men on the ground. She saw a gun lying nearby, picked it up and threw it away. When questioned by detectives, Candy claimed she didn't know who fired the first shots. Rob, who suffered a superficial gunshot wound to the head, was treated at the hospital and then interviewed by detectives. He told them that the gun found at the scene was his, and that it fell out of his pocket during the fight with Emmett at Walgreens. According to Rob, Emmett dove for the gun, and they struggled over it, resulting in Emmett shooting him in the head. Rob claimed he didn't know who shot Emmett during the struggle. The detectives weren't surprised that Rob didn't remember much due to his head wound from the gunshot. However, they did wonder if Emmett had fired the first shot, considering he ended up dead. To get to the bottom of the incident, which occurred in the Walgreens parking lot, the detectives checked the security footage. Upon reviewing the footage, they saw Rob Hall arrive at the parking lot at 9:55 p.m. 1 minute later, he entered the Walgreens store, rushing through each aisle as if searching for someone. The footage then showed Rob leaving the store at 10:06 p.m. and parking his car beside the candy section, where he waited for several minutes. 10 minutes after the shooting, Emmett's truck appeared on security footage as it pulled into the parking lot, but the shooting itself wasn't caught on camera. Although Candy, Emmett's assistant, initially denied having a romantic relationship with her boss, co-workers whispered that they were more than just colleagues. In fact, co-workers often saw Candy and Rob spending time together in Rob's office, with the door closed. Just 3 weeks after she started her job, detectives made a surprising discovery. Emmett had accompanied Candy to the public defender's office to discuss divorcing Rob. During their investigation, crime scene investigators searched Emmett's vehicle and found steroids in the glove compartment. This didn't surprise many of Emmett's loved ones, as he was obsessed with bodybuilding and had been acting strangely, leading them to suspect he was using steroids. When Candy gave her statement to the detectives, she described a distinctive pattern of gunshots that suggested Rob had shot and killed Emmett twice before turning the gun on himself. This evidence was enough for the detectives to obtain an arrest warrant for Rob Hall, charging him with first-degree murder. Rob was arrested and charged with Emmett's murder. The consequences of Rob's actions were severe. If convicted, he faced life in prison without parole or the death penalty. As the trial approached, Ashley, Emmett's wife, hoped it would bring her some closure. She believed that understanding her husband's infidelity and death would help her heal. Prosecutors argued that Rob was angry at Emmett for having an affair with Candy and blamed Emmett for ruining his marriage. According to the prosecution, Rob shot Emmett and then killed himself. However, Rob's defense team told a different story. They claimed Emmett was the aggressor on the night he died, and that he had a history of steroid abuse. They alleged that during the altercation, Emmett grabbed Rob's gun and shot Rob before Rob regained possession and killed Emmett in self-defense. One of the key witnesses in Rob's trial was his wife, Candy. Her testimony differed slightly from her initial statement to the police. Instead of hearing 2 rapid gunshots followed by another, she claimed to have heard a pop, followed by 2 more rapid pops. This new version of events supported the defense's argument that Emmett shot Rob first. To prove Rob was the shooter, prosecutors presented forensic evidence that the type of weapon used in the parking lot shooting left significant gunshot residue, GSR, after firing. Investigators tested Rob and Emmett for GSR and found that Rob's left palm had 32 particles, his right palm had 23, while Emmett had only 1 particle on his left hand and none on his right. The forensic evidence proved that Rob was the one who fired the gun 3 times, and Emmett never possessed the weapon. After careful consideration, the jury found Rob Hall not guilty of first-degree murder, but guilty of second-degree murder, which means the murder was not premeditated. The judge sentenced Rob to 30 years in prison. Rob will be eligible for parole in 2028 when he is 58 years old. Despite the conviction, Rob maintains his innocence and appealed his conviction in 2021, but the Idaho Supreme Court denied him a retrial. 2 months after Emmett's murder, Candy Hall was arrested and charged with embezzlement for allegedly stealing money from her previous employer. This charge was unrelated to Emmett's murder. Candy pleaded guilty and was sentenced to imprisonment, released on parole in 2014, and remains on probation until 2026. In an interview, Candy expressed deep feelings of guilt over the incident, mainly due to its impact on her relationships with her children. She hopes to prove to them that it was a regrettable mistake. Ashley struggled to come to terms with her husband's murder by his lover's husband. In a 2015 interview, she faced Candy Hall for the first time. Despite her emotional pain, Ashley decided to move on and create a new life. She moved out of town with their 5 children, who gradually adjusted to the change and found joy again. Ashley eventually remarried, had 2 more children, and now blogs for victims. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Chris Watts. Shanann Rzucek and Christopher Watts, both from North Carolina, met in 2012. Shanann was from Aberdeen and Chris was from Spring Lake. They tied the knot on November 3rd, 2012, but not everyone was thrilled about their union. Chris's parents, Cindy and Ronnie Watts, didn't attend the wedding, with Cindy later explaining that she didn't get along with Shanann and didn't like how she treated her son. A year after getting married, Shanann and Chris moved to Frederick, Colorado, marking a fresh start in their lives. They were excited to start a family and eventually welcomed 2 daughters, Bella Marie, born on December 17, 2013, and Celeste Catherine, Cece, born on July 17, 2015. Shanann had been diagnosed with lupus, a chronic autoimmune disease, at a young age. Despite the challenges this presented for getting pregnant, Shanann defied the odds and became a mother twice. She was known for her kindness, compassion, and positivity, and was determined to create a happy life for herself and her family. Shanann was a loving and exceptional mother, and her vibrant personality drew people to her. Every morning, she would send her friends heartfelt texts that read, "Good morning, beautiful," making them feel cherished and uplifted. Her daughters, Bella and Cece, were the center of her universe, and she devoted herself to nurturing and supporting them. Shanann was active on social media, sharing videos that offered a glimpse into her daily life and that of her daughters. Her friends and family cherished these videos, which showcased her warm personality. In many of these videos, Shanann expressed her deep admiration for her husband, Chris, portraying him as a loving husband and father. However, those close to the family found Chris difficult to connect with on a deeper level, as he tended to keep to himself. Despite their reservations, Shanann's family and friends accepted Chris because of her deep love for him. However, the couple was struggling financially, and in June 2015, they filed for bankruptcy due to a heavy mortgage, multiple car payments, loans, medical bills, and significant credit card debt. At the time, Chris worked at Anadarko Petroleum, while Shanann worked at a children's hospital call center. However, by 2016, Shanann had changed careers, becoming a consultant for a multi-level marketing company, selling a nutritional supplement administered through a patch. Shanann loved her job, and it showed. As her co-worker Cynthia DeRosette put it, she had a way of making everyone she met feel her positive energy. Despite being happy with her life, Shanann had one wish: to have a baby boy to complete her family with her husband and 2 daughters. In spring 2018, Shanann got an unexpected but wonderful surprise. She was pregnant again. Overjoyed and excited, she wanted to capture her husband Chris's reaction. So she planned to surprise him on May 28th with the news. Further tests confirmed Shanann was having a baby boy. Shanann and Chris chose the name Nico for their new baby. When they told their daughters, Bella and Cece, they would be big sisters, the girls were happy. In the summer of 2018, when Shanann was pregnant with Nico, she visited her family in North Carolina while Chris stayed behind in Colorado for work. Shanann took her daughters, Bella and Cece, to visit Chris's parents, Cindy and Ronnie, despite having a strained relationship with them. During the visit, Cindy prepared a snack for Cece without considering Shanann's prior warning about Cece's severe nut allergy. As a result, the snack contained peanuts, which put Cece's life in danger. Shanann was deeply disturbed by this incident, feeling that Cindy had recklessly disregarded her granddaughter's safety. Shanann expressed her outrage and disappointment in a text message to Chris, accusing his mother of intentionally trying to provoke her by putting Cece's life at risk. She urged Chris to confront his father about Cindy's behavior, implying that if Chris didn't take action, it would suggest he was complicit in his mother's harmful actions, and that Shanann's concerns for her children's safety were justified. While Shanann was visiting her family in North Carolina, she noticed a sudden change in Chris's communication style. He stopped responding to her messages and calls, leaving her confused and concerned. When she asked him what was going on, Chris explained that he had taken on more responsibilities at work due to the arrival of new employees, but reassured her that everything was fine. A week later, Chris flew to North Carolina to spend time with Shanann and their 2 daughters, Bella and Cece. The girls were excited to see their father and ran to hug him as soon as he arrived. Chris was enthusiastic in his greeting, scooping them up in a tight hug. However, his greeting to Shanann was noticeably colder. Instead of a kiss, he simply nodded at her. Shanann felt hurt and surprised by Chris's distant behavior, and she couldn't help but confide in a friend about her growing concerns through a text message. Shanann felt like she was living with a stranger, not the man she married. She was saddened and confused by the change in Chris. When they were in the same room, he refused to talk to her, and instead, they communicated through their phones. Shanann sent a heartbreaking text to her friend, explaining the situation, and even shared a photo of them sitting on separate couches, facing away from each other. Shanann suspected that Chris might be interested in someone else, which shocked her friend. However, her friend disagreed, saying that Chris loved Shanann too much to do that. But Shanann was devastated because Chris had told her that he no longer thought they were compatible. This was a huge surprise to Shanann, who had always believed their love was strong. Chris had confessed to Shanann that he had hoped getting her pregnant would change his feelings, but it didn't. Shanann was devastated to hear this, as she treasured their relationship and thought their love could overcome any obstacle. Desperate to save her family, Shanann proposed that they attend couples counseling to work through their issues. However, Chris refused. Shanann was willing to do whatever it took to rescue their relationship, but she realized Chris was not willing to meet her halfway. Despite her best efforts, Shanann came to understand that Chris was unwilling to compromise on anything. After their return to Colorado from North Carolina, the family settled back into their routine. However, Shanann soon left for another business trip, this time to Arizona. During her trip to Arizona, Shanann's friends noticed a change in her behavior. She seemed confused, distressed, and not her usual cheerful self. One evening, while they were all in their hotel room, Shanann opened up to her friends about her concerns. She told them that Chris had expressed doubts about their relationship and refused to go to couples therapy. On August 11th, while Shanann was still in Arizona, she received a notification on her phone about a restaurant charge on her and Chris's account. The amount of the charge raised her suspicions, and she wondered if Chris was having dinner with someone else. This made her feel uneasy and doubtful. When Shanann returned home from her trip on August 13th, her friend Nicole Atkinson drove her home. Their doorbell camera captured Shanann entering her house at around 1:48 a.m. The next morning, Shanann's friends became worried when they didn't receive their usual good morning messages from her. They knew she had an important doctor's appointment at 9:30 a.m. and were concerned that something might be wrong. When Shanann missed a 12:30 p.m. business meeting, her close friend Nicole Atkinson became alarmed. As the day went by with no word from Shanann, Nicole's concern grew. She sensed something was off. Feeling a strong urge to act, Nicole drove to Shanann's house. As she arrived, she felt a knot in her stomach. Shanann's van was parked in the garage, and her daily shoes sat by the front door. Nicole knocked on the front door, hoping Shanann would emerge, explaining that she had overslept after her flight the previous day. But there was no response. One of Shanann's friends contacted her husband Chris, telling him they couldn't reach her. Chris reassured them, thinking Shanann might have taken their daughters to a friend's house. Shanann's friends were puzzled by Chris's response because they had all been in touch with each other, and none of them knew where Shanann was. She had no plans to meet up with any of them. As a result, her friends told Chris they planned to contact the Frederick Police Department to report Shanann and their daughters, Bella and Cece, as missing. However, Chris did not want to involve the police. One of Shanann's friends, Nicole, was so worried that she went ahead and called 911 to report the three missing. After Nicole's call, a police officer from the Frederick Police Department arrived at the Watts home. The officer's body cam footage showed Nicole's distress as she explained what she knew about Shanann and her daughters. When Chris arrived, He approached the officer, but unlike Nicole, he did not appear to be very concerned, despite his wife and daughters being missing. During a search of Shanann and Chris's home, the officer found Shanann's purse, which contained her medication and that of her 2 daughters. This finding concerned Shanann's friend Nicole, but Chris, her husband, remained unusually calm. The officer also discovered Shanann's wedding pants on the bedside table. Afterwards, the officer and Chris went to a neighbor's house to review the footage from their security camera. A camera captured footage of Chris's driveway and garage, showing him opening the garage door, moving around, and leaving the house at 5:28 a.m. When Chris watched the footage with the police, his behavior changed. He became nervous and fidgety, which didn't go unnoticed by his neighbor, who suggested to the officer that Chris wasn't acting normal. Chris's reluctance to search for his wife and daughters, Bella and Cece, raised concerns among Shanann's friends, who found it incomprehensible that he wasn't worried about their disappearance. As the investigation unfolded, the police canvassed the neighborhood, asking residents if they had seen Shanann or anything unusual. The FBI and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation joined the search the next day, along with the Boulder Police Department's cadaver dogs, which searched the property and inside the house. During the search, an officer handling a cadaver dog commented that the house smelled of cleaning products and seemed unusually clean. The officer's suspicions were raised by a comment, leading them to inspect the cleanliness of the home more closely. The presence of cleaning products hinted that someone might have tried to hide evidence or erase potential clues. While his house was being searched, Chris gave an interview to 2 Denver news stations outside his residence. During the interview, Chris claimed that he and Shanann hadn't argued before she left, but he did mention they had an emotional conversation. Chris appealed to whoever was holding his family, begging for their return and expressing his desire to be reunited with them. He emphasized that his house felt empty without them, but his behavior during the interview raised concerns. Chris appeared cold and unemotional, which surprised those who knew him. Shanann's friends, who watched the interview, were disgusted by Chris's nonchalant demeanor, finding it strange and contradictory to his plea for his family's return. On August 14th, Special Agent Coda conducted an interview with Chris. During the conversation, Chris suggested that Shanann might have taken the girls to a friend's house to unwind. Meanwhile, the police station received a flood of tips about possible sightings of Shanann and the girls. The department received various photos, which Chris was asked to review to see if he could identify his missing wife and daughters. However, he was unable to provide any identifications. Agent Coda also asked Chris about his marriage to Shanann during the interview. Chris claimed that he had never been unfaithful to Shanann, and, to the best of his knowledge, she had never been unfaithful to him either. He explained that they were the type of couple who would confide in each other if they ever felt tempted to stray. One notable aspect of Chris's behavior during the interview caught Agent Coda's attention. Chris frequently made hand movements towards his neck. Agent Coda's intuition was growing stronger, suggesting the movements might be pointing to a more sinister truth. During the interview, Agent Coda stepped out briefly to share his concerns with the other officers, suspecting Chris might have strangled Shanann. As the hours ticked by with no sign of Shanann and her daughters, the loved one's anxiety turned to desperation. Despite their fears for Shanann's safety, they held on to the glimmer of hope that Bella and Cece might still be alive. The lack of updates from the authorities only added to their distress. After a 3-hour interrogation, Chris was released from the police department, but the police instructed him to return the next day, August 15th, for a polygraph test. Here's what happened. Chris agreed to take a polygraph test to help with the investigation into his family's disappearance. On August 15th, Chris picked up his father from the airport and went to the Frederick Police Department, where Tammy Lee from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation administered the test. During the test, Chris denied any involvement in his family's disappearance and claimed not to know where his wife Suzanne was. However, the results of the test were not in Chris's favor. This led the detectives to strongly suspect that Chris was responsible for the deaths of his wife and daughters. Tammy Lee, a highly skilled polygrapher, confronted Chris about the test results. Chris admitted that he had caused Suzanne emotional pain, but denied physically harming her. He also confessed to having an affair with a co-worker named Nicole Kessinger, which he deeply regretted. Despite his confessions, Chris still denied any involvement in his family's disappearance. At one point, he asked to have his father, Ronnie, present during the interview. The officers were hesitant, worried that this might lead Chris to ask for a lawyer. Chris Watt's father was allowed to accompany him in the interrogation room, a risky move that detectives hoped would prompt Chris to confess. And it worked. Chris admitted to killing Suzanne, but claimed he did so because she had harmed their daughters, Bella and Cece. However, this excuse was immediately met with skepticism by Suzanne's friends, who knew she would never hurt her children. In fact, Suzanne was eagerly awaiting the birth of her third child, a son named Nico. During the interrogation, Chris disclosed the location of Suzanne's body, which he had buried in a shallow grave at one of his work sites. He also revealed that he had disposed of his daughters' bodies in oil tanks. Despite this, Chris continued to deny any involvement in their deaths. Even after being arrested and taken into custody, the detectives never believed Suzanne was responsible for harming her daughters. In the end, Chris pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. At the sentencing hearing for Chris, the judge expressed outrage over the brutal crime Chris had committed, calling it the most inhumane and vicious one he had seen in his entire career of handling thousands of cases. Years later, Chris confessed to murdering his wife Suzanne in their bed. According to Chris, he strangled her after she discovered his infidelity and threatened to take their daughters away. Chris then put Suzanne's body in his truck and drove to his work site with their two daughters. Tragically, Chris admitted to killing his daughters one by one at the site, with one daughter forced to witness the murder of her sister before meeting the same fate. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Sierra Jugan. Sierra Jugan was a bright and cheerful young woman who spread joy and laughter wherever she went. Her adventurous nature and ability to find humor in any situation made her a delight to be around, even when she made mistakes. As she entered high school, Sierra's confidence and enthusiasm only grew. She fearlessly tried out new experiences, including volleyball, and showed remarkable poise both on and off the court. After returning from a family vacation on July 19, 2016, Sierra was excited to start the new semester at the University of Toledo, where she had plans to study abroad. She had recently bought a new bike and was eager to take it for a spin. Her mom wanted to discuss her study abroad plans with her, but Sierra decided to visit her boyfriend Josh's house, which was 7.12 miles away beforehand. Sierra left her house in high spirits, wearing shorts and a tank top, and promised her mom she would be back by 10:05 p.m. However, when Josh tried to reach her later, her phone went straight to voicemail. Alarmed, Josh called Sierra's mom, who immediately sensed that something was wrong. Sierra's family, including her aunt and Josh, mounted a search effort to locate her after she went missing. They thoroughly searched the neighborhood, suspecting she might have been involved in an accident. Despite their efforts, they didn't find any clues or signs of Sierra's whereabouts. As time passed, Sierra's family became increasingly worried. Her mom eventually contacted the police, who arrived about an hour later. A concerned neighbor informed the family that County Road 6 was blocked off, and they rushed to the scene. There, they found a chaotic atmosphere and officers who wouldn't allow them to pass. The officers weren't able to provide any information, leaving Sierra's family in a state of panic. In desperation, they decided to seek help from the FBI. As the night wore on, Sierra's family was left to wonder what had happened to their daughter, unable to rest due to their growing concern. The next day, Sierra's mom and aunt started searching for her by calling hospitals, looking for any unidentified females. Although they didn't find anything, they got a promising lead from Detroit, Michigan. A young woman who looked a lot like Sierra was in the hospital after escaping from a moving vehicle with serious injuries. To confirm her identity, a nurse asked Sierra's family to describe any distinctive marks on her body. Sierra's mom mentioned a scar on her calf and her pierced belly button. The woman in the hospital seemed to match Sierra's description, giving the family hope that they had finally found her. However, their hopes were soon dashed when they discovered that the woman in the hospital was not Sierra after all. The family was devastated to learn that the person found wasn't Sierra, as they had pinned their hopes on it being her. Later that morning, police officers came to Sierra's house to update them on the previous night's events. One of the officers had discovered a disturbed cornfield near the area while parking his car. He noticed signs of a struggle inside the cornfield and found a motorcycle track. To avoid contaminating potential evidence, he retreated without touching anything. As he retreated, he caught a glimpse of something shiny that turned out to be Sierra's purple bike. Further investigation revealed several items at the scene, including male and female sunglasses, a bloody sock, and a screwdriver. Based on these findings, the police believed that Sierra had likely been abducted from that location. Detectives investigating Sierra's disappearance interviewed her friends and family to learn more about her boyfriend, Josh. They found out that Sierra and Josh had been close friends since childhood, starting from when they were just 7 years old. As they grew older, their friendship turned into a romantic relationship in their first year of high school, and they became known for being a happy and adventurous couple. Skiing was one of their shared hobbies, and they would often go skiing together. After high school, Sierra went to the University of Toledo, while Josh attended Bowling Green. Despite the physical distance between them, they remained committed to each other and would often talk about getting married someday. However, Sierra wanted to focus on her education before settling down, showing how dedicated she was to her studies. Despite the challenges of being apart, their relationship remained strong and serious. On July 19th, detectives learned that Sierra had visited Josh's house in the early afternoon. She left his house around 6:30 p.m. to return home, and Josh, concerned for her safety, accompanied her on his motorcycle for part of the way. However, after a few miles, Sierra insisted that Josh turn around and let her ride her bike the rest of the way home alone. Josh reluctantly agreed, and they parted ways. Josh headed back on his motorcycle, while Sierra continued riding her bike. During the investigation into Sierra's disappearance, detectives found motorcycle tracks in the corn stalks near Sierra's bike. This discovery raised a key question: did these tracks come from Josh's motorcycle? The detectives couldn't ignore this potential connection and began investigating further to see if they could link Josh to the scene of Sierra's disappearance. They set up a command post to gather and analyze any relevant clues. A promising lead emerged quickly. A local resident came forward, saying he had found a motorcycle helmet on the side of the road on July 14th while driving. He picked it up and stored it in his truck. After learning about Sierra's disappearance, he examined the helmet more closely and discovered red stains that appeared to be blood. The helmet was found in the same general area where Sierra's bike was discovered in the cornfield. The detectives asked Josh about his motorcycle helmet, and to their relief, he produced it, confirming he had it with him. They also verified his alibi by speaking with his parents, like ruling him out as a suspect. Although visibly shaken, Sierra's family never considered Josh responsible for her disappearance. The detectives were determined to identify the owner of the blood-stained helmet, recognizing the significance of DNA evidence. They sent the helmet to the crime lab for testing, anticipating a potential breakthrough. The detectives waited patiently for the results, hoping it would lead them closer to solving the case. The news of Sierra's disappearance spread quickly throughout the town, prompting the community to come together to search for her. Citizens joined forces, organizing search parties that scoured every possible area, searching for any clue that could lead to her whereabouts. As the townspeople worked tirelessly to bring Sierra home safely, they felt a strong sense of unity. To show their support, the community organized a candlelight vigil at the local high school. The atmosphere was emotional, filled with grief, hope, and determination. Hundreds of people gathered, holding candles and sending their thoughts and prayers for Sierra's safe return. After 2 days of investigation, the police received a tip about a suspicious van seen speeding through the area. They suspected that Sierra might have been taken in the van, possibly falling victim to sex trafficking. The police received a tip about a license plate number linked to a van that was speeding through the area where Sierra went missing. They interviewed the van's owner, who explained that he had sped up because another vehicle had suddenly approached from behind, possibly a family member searching for Sierra. This had startled him, causing him to quickly leave the area, which may have given the impression that he was involved in Sierra's disappearance. After 48 hours of investigation, the police had no leads on Sierra's whereabouts. As each day passed, her family's hopes of finding her alive were dwindling. The police continued their door-to-door search, which eventually led them to a nearby farm that belonged to James Worley. The farm had several structures, including a house, a trailer, and a large barn. The police questioned James Worley about the day Sierra disappeared, hoping to get any information that could help them find her. To the detectives' surprise, James revealed that he had been riding his motorcycle on the day Sierra went missing. However, he claimed that his bike had broken down, causing him to lose some items, including a screwdriver and his helmet. The detectives were stunned, as these were the same items found at the scene of Sierra's abduction. This revelation raised significant suspicions about James. The detectives were determined to investigate further and questioned James about Sierra's disappearance. They noticed scratches on his face, indicating that he had been involved in a struggle. This discovery only increased their suspicions and raised more questions. They wondered if the scratches were the result of a confrontation with Sierra. The detectives decided to investigate James's background, hoping to uncover relevant information. What they discovered sent chills down their spines. James had a dark criminal history, including a previous attempt to abduct a 26-year-old woman named Robin Garder on July 4, 1989. On that day, Robin was getting ready for a neighborhood picnic when she decided to go for a bike ride. As she rode, she became thirsty and contemplated returning home. However, before she could make that decision, a car approached from behind and collided with her bike. The impact sent Robin flying into a nearby ditch. The driver, who later turned out to be James, approached Robin and asked if she was okay. However, he soon revealed sinister intentions, striking her in the back of the head and threatening her life with a screwdriver. He forced her into his car, attempting to handcuff her. Robin resisted fiercely, preventing him from securing the second cuff. Despite being on the verge of losing consciousness, Robin continued to fight. She screamed for help, but her cries were drowned out by the desolate cornfields. Just as she was about to give up, she heard a motorcycle approaching. The rider noticed her distress and stopped to help. Robin escaped by climbing onto the back of the motorcycle, leaving her captor behind. The motorcyclist drove Robin home, where she collapsed. Her mother called the police and an ambulance, and Robin was rushed to the hospital. The motorcyclist then led the police back to the scene, where they found James still present with his car. James cooperated fully, providing identification, but his account of the events differed significantly from the truth. He denied any intention of abducting Robin, but the detectives were not convinced. James Worley claimed that he had to restrain Robin with handcuffs after a bike accident to prevent her from harming herself, not to harm her. He said he was concerned about her well-being and wanted to get her help. However, James had a dark past. In 1989, he was arrested for trying to kidnap Robin and was found guilty, receiving a 6 to 10-year sentence. Due to good behavior, he was released after 3 years. When Robin learned of his release, she was terrified, fearing he might harm her again. The police had reason to suspect James in Sierra's disappearance, given his criminal history. They obtained a search warrant for his residence, which he shared with his mother. Initially, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but upon inspecting his expansive backyard, they found a suspicious barn. Inside the barn, they discovered a small green crate containing labeled and sealed bags of women's clothing, including a pair of bloody purple panties. The detectives also found a hidden freezer, air mattress with stains, zip ties, duct tape, and handcuffs. James claimed the items were for a porn business, but the evidence suggested otherwise. The police collected all the items for DNA testing, and the evidence led to James's arrest for Sierra's murder. The investigation continued, with the police searching every inch of James's property, including a pond, which they drained to search for evidence. The question on everyone's mind was, where was Sierra's body? The detectives expanded their investigation to the attic's front insulation and neighboring properties, recognizing that evidence might have been dispersed beyond James's property. They thoroughly explored all leads. A farmer reported a suspicious area in his field where the corn seemed matted down, with a nearby mound of dirt that resembled a potential grave. The farmer's concerns were heightened due to the ongoing search for Sierra, so he quickly contacted the police. The police responded promptly, noticing a fresh pile of dirt that fueled their suspicions. They carefully processed the area, avoiding potential evidence disturbance. Despite their thorough search, no clues were found regarding Sierra's whereabouts. The detectives then searched adjacent farms using drones and helicopters to cover more ground. They soon discovered a mound of dirt with freshly matted corn, with trained dogs indicating a potential crime scene. As they dug, they made a grim discovery: human remains, later confirmed to be Sierra's body. Tragically, her hands were bound behind her back, and her feet were tied to handcuffs. An object was lodged in her mouth, restricting her airway, which ultimately led to her death. The devastating news was delivered to the Sierra family that night. The family was overwhelmed with grief, and their sorrow was palpable. 1 month after the abduction and murder, James Worley was indicted on 19 counts, including kidnapping and aggravated murder. 2 years later, Worley stood trial, pleading not guilty despite overwhelming evidence. The state presented a terrifying story over 8 intense days, and the jury deliberated for 6 hours before finding Worley guilty on all counts related to Sierra's murder. The sentence imposed was death. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Ryan Poston. Ryan Poston was born on December 30th, 1982 in Fort Mitchell, Kentucky, and grew up with 3 loving sisters. His parents provided him with an adventurous upbringing, allowing him to attend schools in Switzerland and the Philippines. Ryan's good looks, charming features, and charismatic personality made him a standout among his peers. After completing high school, he attended Indiana University, where he excelled in his studies, graduating with honors in 2005 with a triple major in political science, history, and geography. Following in his family's footsteps, Ryan pursued a career in law and enrolled in Salmon P. Chase College of Law at Northern Kentucky University. His ultimate goal was to run a successful law firm, providing fair and competent legal representation to those who couldn't afford high-priced attorneys. After a painful breakup in 2011, Ryan turned to his cousin, Carissa, for support. During this time, he regularly visited her in Lexington, Kentucky, where he met Shayna Hubers, a native of the city. Shayna was a charming and lively individual with a warm personality that drew people to her. Despite their 8-year age difference, their mutual attraction grew stronger with each visit Ryan made to Lexington. As they spent more time together, their connection deepened. Shayna began to spend more weekends in Highland Heights, where Ryan lived, taking care of him and cooking for him. However, their promising future came to a devastating end on October 12, 2012. In a distressing 911 call, Shayna revealed that she had just killed her boyfriend Ryan. She described a harrowing scene of domestic violence that had escalated out of control, claiming that Ryan had attempted to physically abuse her and confronted her with a gun. According to Shayna, she panicked and pulled the trigger, shooting Ryan, and then shot him several more times, believing she was putting him out of his misery. Within minutes of Shayna's call, officers arrived at the scene, responding to the shocking tragedy. When police officers arrived, they told Shayna to come out of the apartment with her hands up. At first, she was hesitant, but she eventually complied. As she walked out, the officers told her to lie down on the ground. Shayna was clearly upset as she followed their instructions. After handcuffing her and putting her in the patrol car, the officers went into the apartment and found Ryan Poston's body on the dining room floor, covered in blood. The crime scene investigators found that the apartment was slightly messy, but nothing out of the ordinary for a 29-year-old man. The investigators learned that Ryan had a concealed carry permit and owned guns, including the Sig Sauer semi-automatic that Shayna used to shoot him. From the evidence, they determined that Ryan was sitting at the table when Shayna shot him. They knew this because of the blood on the table. However, the fact that many items on the table were undisturbed raised doubts about Shayna's story. If there had been a fight, the items would have been disturbed. The investigators searched the apartment thoroughly, while other officers canvassed the neighborhood, looking for additional information. One neighbor, Nikki, provided valuable information to the detective. Nikki knew Shayna well and believed that Ryan didn't return Shayna's dedication to him. According to Nikki, they frequently argued, often disturbing the peace. Months earlier, Nikki recalled an incident where Shayna came to her door in tears, saying she was afraid of Ryan. Shayna claimed that Ryan had picked her up and thrown her down the hallway, injuring her. Nikki encouraged Shayna to report the abuse to the police, but Shayna chose not to. At the police station, detectives took Shayna to an interrogation room to question her about shooting Ryan. Before questioning her, they read her Miranda rights, informing her of her right to an attorney. Shayna exercised this right and requested an attorney. However, she chose to talk to the detectives despite this. When asked about the victim, Shayna replied, "The man I killed," which showed a sense of detachment. She claimed she acted in self-defense, saying Ryan had grabbed her by the throat and thrown her around the apartment. Shayna described the night as surreal and out of body. Later in the interview, she added that Ryan had said mean things to her, taunting her while holding a gun, and that he was under the influence of drugs. Shayna maintained that she shot Ryan because she believed he was going to kick her out of his condo. She said she picked up the gun and shot him once, and then shot him several more times after seeing him twitch. During her confession, Shayna revealed that Ryan was vain and wanted a nose job, so she shot him in the face to grant his wish. During the intense questioning, Shayna revealed her worries about her schoolwork and how having a dead boyfriend would affect her future relationships. She was specifically concerned that no one would want to marry her once they found out she had killed her boyfriend in self-defense. The detective listened to her statement, but ultimately arrested her and charged her with Ryan's murder. Shayna appeared genuinely surprised by her arrest, claiming she had acted in self-defense when she shot him. In 2015, Shayna's trial began, filling the courtroom with anticipation. The prosecutor started by comparing Shayna to Jodi Arias, who had also been accused of murdering her boyfriend, Travis Alexander. The similarities between the two cases added to the tension in the courtroom as everyone waited for the verdict. The prosecutor believed that Shayna was obsessed with her ex-boyfriend Ryan, and that he was all she could think about. Ryan's friends testified that he wanted to end their relationship and was avoiding Shayna's calls and messages. Despite this, Shayna would often show up uninvited at Ryan's condo in Highland Heights. On the night Ryan was murdered, the prosecution presented evidence that he had a date planned with Audrey Bolt, a former beauty queen. The prosecution suggested that Shayna was motivated by jealousy and anger towards Ryan's new love interest. Audrey Bolt testified that Ryan stood her up on the night of the murder. She had no idea he had been shot and killed until later. The prosecution presented evidence that Ryan had told his father he wanted to break up with Shayna, and his father advised him to be kind to her to avoid a messy breakup. However, Ryan and Shayna exchanged texts on the day of the murder, with Ryan telling her he didn't want to see her. Despite this, Shayna showed up at his condo uninvited. The prosecution believed that during an argument, Ryan told Shayna he was done with her and that she could no longer control him. This allegedly enraged Shayna, who then picked up a gun and shot Ryan. The prosecution played a video of Shayna's police interrogation, which they claimed showed her to be a cold-blooded murderer. In the video, Shayna appears carefree and unemotional, which the prosecution argued was inconsistent with someone who had just killed in self-defense. However, this interpretation was open to interpretation by the jury. The defense argued that Ryan was acting erratically and violently on the night of the murder due to drugs he was taking, including anti-anxiety medication and amphetamines. The autopsy results showed that these drugs were present in Ryan's system. The defense claimed that Shayna shot Ryan in self-defense. The evidence suggested that the substances he was using influenced his actions. To support this idea, Shayna's lawyers called an expert in toxicology to testify on her behalf. The expert stated that a combination of anti-anxiety medications and amphetamines could cause someone to become violent and paranoid. The defense presented this expert testimony to create a reasonable explanation for Shayna's actions, questioning whether she had intentionally meant to harm anyone. During Shayna's trial in April 2015, the prosecution became worried that the jury might be swayed by Shayna's self-defense claim, particularly because she was smart, young, and attractive. These fears were alleviated on April 23 when the jury delivered a guilty verdict, convicting Shayna of murdering her boyfriend, Ryan Poston. However, at the sentencing hearing in August 2015, Shayna continued to blame Ryan for his own death, which outraged his friends and family. Shayna claimed she was innocent throughout the trial and refused to take responsibility for her actions, despite the evidence against her. In Kentucky, defendants who are victims of domestic violence may be eligible for reduced parole after serving just 20% of their sentence. However, the judge didn't believe Shayna qualified for this reduced parole, citing that her crime was a premeditated murder. As a result, Shayna was sentenced to 40 years in prison, making her eligible for parole in 17 years, at the age of 41 in 2032. After her sentencing, Shayna appealed for a new trial, which was granted in August 2016. The reason for the appeal was that one of the jurors had a felony conviction, which they had concealed. This violated Kentucky law, as felons are not allowed to serve on juries. In August 2018, Shayna's second trial for Ryan Poston's murder began, 4 months later than expected. Her defense attorney presented opening arguments, stating that during her year-and-a-half relationship with Ryan, Shayna tried her best to make him happy. However, their relationship suffered as a result. The defense attorney claimed that on the night Shayna met Ryan, he was violent toward her, both physically and sexually. This incident had a lasting impact on Shayna, causing her to take several weeks to respond to his messages afterwards. Additionally, the defense team argued that Shayna had a history of trauma, stemming from a sexual assault she experienced in high school. This led to her struggles with alcohol abuse and promiscuity. They claimed that this traumatic experience contributed to her behavior on the night of Ryan's murder. The defense team's strategy was to present a sympathetic portrayal of Shayna, highlighting her troubled past and arguing that she was not responsible for her actions on the night of the murder. They aimed to challenge the prosecution's narrative and convince the jury that her behavior was driven by a combination of factors, including a history of abuse and a toxic relationship with Ryan. Shayna's defense team claimed that she was a victim of domestic violence by Ryan, rather than a cold-blooded killer. They argued that her actions were a result of years of abuse, not driven by revenge or financial gain. The defense pointed out that Ryan constantly belittled Shayna about her weight and breast size, making her feel insecure and inadequate. This, they said, contributed to her low self-esteem. The defense also stated that Shayna and Ryan's sexual relationship was troubled, marked by frequent arguments and frustration on both sides. They claimed that Ryan's desire for a more intimate connection was unfulfilled, leading to a growing rift between them. The defense presented evidence that Shayna had received a treatment to improve her romantic life. They claimed that she got this treatment to address sexual problems in their relationship and strengthen their bond. The defense argued that Ryan's consistent lack of interest and rejection made things worse, causing Shayna to become more and more frustrated and disconnected from him. The defense claimed that Ryan often broke up with Shayna, only to pursue relationships with other women. However, the prosecution clarified that they were not trying to portray Ryan as a perfect partner, but rather as someone who was not abusive. The prosecution argued that Shayna did not kill Ryan in self-defense, but rather because he had finally ended their toxic relationship on the night of the shooting. They believed Ryan had every reason to break up with Shayna, as she continued to harass him even after their previous breakups. Despite Ryan's efforts to end the relationship, Shayna consistently returned. The prosecution saw this as evidence of Shayna's inability to let go of the relationship. A friend of Ryan's testified that this breakup was different, as Ryan had never had the courage to end things with Shayna in person before, implying that this time the breakup would be permanent. Ryan accused Shayna of trying to hold on to him. To support this claim, the prosecution presented texts where Shayna told her friends that the romantic interactions with Ryan had brought them closer. However, Shayna testified in her own defense, contradicting Ryan's claim. She said that their romantic interactions had actually driven them apart. In a separate text exchange, Shayna asked Ryan for sex, but he declined due to the side effects of his antidepressant medication, which had reduced his libido. Despite these conflicting accounts, Shayna testified that Ryan had forcibly had sex with her. After 5 hours of deliberation, the jury again found Shayna guilty of murdering Ryan, despite the contradictory testimonies and evidence. The jury confirmed their original verdict, and during the sentencing hearing, Shayna's mother emotionally addressed the judge, sharing stories of her daughter's remarkable singing talent, which had earned her multiple college scholarships. Through tears, she asked the jury to consider granting Shayna parole, emphasizing that her daughter still had the potential to positively impact others' lives. Shayna's mother made it clear that her plea did not diminish the profound grief and pain experienced by the family of Ryan Poston. Despite her mother's emotional appeal, Shayna was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. According to the sentence, Shayna must serve at least 17 years before becoming eligible for parole in 2032. She is currently serving her sentence at the Kentucky Correctional Institute for Women in Pewee Valley. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Jamie Melgar. Sandra Melgar often lies in her small prison cell, reflecting on the unexpected turns her life has taken. She never imagined she'd become a widow and a suspect in her husband's murder. A year and a half after his tragic death, a grand jury indicted her, and nearly 5 years later, a jury convicted her based solely on circumstantial evidence. There was no clear motive or physical proof linking her to the crime. Since her husband's passing, every day has been a living nightmare for Sandra, now 59. Sometimes, she still expects to go back home and catches herself wanting to share things with him, only to remember he's gone. In a recent interview, Sandra's blue eyes were red and puffy from crying. She said with tears streaming down her pale cheeks that it didn't feel like he was really gone, and that it was like he was just away on a trip. She paused, then continued that she tried not to dwell on it, and knew she would see him again. For the past 10 months, Sandra had been imprisoned at the William P. Hobby Unit, a women's prison in the Texas countryside. Sandra maintains contact with her friends and family, many of whom still believe she is innocent. Despite the difficulties of communicating in a noisy prison environment and her soft voice, she regularly talks to her daughter, Elizabeth Liz Melgar Rose. Sandra also writes letters to her friends, who keep her updated about her Pomeranian, Lola, who was at home on the night of the incident. Thanks to the efforts of one of her closest friends, Sandra gets to spend a couple of hours with a rotating group of friends and family every weekend. Her daughter Liz is her biggest supporter, acting as her spokesperson and passionately arguing that her mother's imprisonment is a grave injustice that has deprived her of both parents. Liz mentioned that she had never seen her mother so broken and devastated, and that she had never been able to recover from that. Sandra's husband Jamie met a tragic end on December 23, 2012. Sandra has no memory of that night, which has raised suspicions among investigators. However, she maintains her innocence, insisting she did not commit the crime. As Sandra sits in her prison cell, her thoughts often go back to the evening of their 32nd wedding anniversary, on December 23, 2012. That night, she and Jamie had celebrated together. Later, she was awoken by their barking dogs to find herself bound and gagged on the closet floor, her head throbbing and her body aching. Sandra tried to stretch her legs and peek through the gap under the closet door, but her bindings and 2 hip replacements limited her movement. Even if she could free herself, a chair blocked the door handle, preventing her escape. In the same closet, she would later discover her husband Jamie, lying lifeless with 31 stab wounds to his hands and chest. The white walls were now stained with blood, and a grey telephone cord was used to bind Jamie's feet. A medical examiner later determined that all of Jamie's injuries were defensive wounds, indicating that he had fought back against his attacker instead of trying to escape. One particularly vicious blow had nearly severed his right thumb, which likely contributed to the extensive blood splatters found in the closet and bedroom. The bedroom was in disarray, with dresser drawers open and clothes, books, and pill bottles scattered all over the floor. Sandra's purse and wallet had been rummaged through, and their contents were strewn across the blood-stained white comforter on the bed. A small white medical stool at the foot of the bed had blood stains on it, suggesting that it had been used as a makeshift surface for a knife during the attack. Nearby, a wooden chair had blood dripping down its back. The jacuzzi bathtub, where Sandra and Jamie had celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary just the night before, told a tragic story. A blood-stained white blouse, a green towel, and a silver chef knife with a 6-inch blade covered in blood droplets in every crevice were found in the bathtub, revealing the chilling details of the events that had unfolded. Police identified a knife as the murder weapon, a stark contrast to the joyful evening that had preceded it. Earlier that night, Sandra and Jamie had celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary with dinner at their favorite Mexican restaurant, planning to continue the celebration in their jacuzzi with candles, cocktails, strawberries, and whipped cream. After more than 3 decades together, Jaime and Sandra remained deeply in love, as Sandra would later tell the authorities. They had met in their senior year at Lamar High School, where Jamie was immediately smitten with the 17-year-old Sandra, who had blue eyes and blonde hair. Sandra was drawn to his sense of humor, intelligence, and kind nature, while Jamie admired her intelligence, down-to-earth personality, and humility. Before long, they became extremely close, and 2 years after graduating from high school, they got married in a simple ceremony at a courthouse in downtown Houston. On their anniversary, Sandra and Jamie relaxed in their jacuzzi, reflecting on their past and future. They dreamed of traveling, visiting the Grand Canyon, Ireland, and seeing the Northern Lights. With Jamie's retirement from the Houston Independent School District approaching, they envisioned a beachfront property to settle down after their adventures. Sandra and her husband Jamie spent a romantic evening together, giving each other massages and relaxing in the jacuzzi. However, their peaceful night was interrupted by their dogs barking. Jamie got out of the bathroom to take care of the dogs, and that was the last time Sandra saw him alive. Meanwhile, Jamie's brother Herman was waiting outside the house, wondering why no one was answering the door. Herman and his family had been invited over for dinner, but Jamie and Sandra weren't responding to calls or the doorbell. Herman found it strange, especially since Jamie's truck was still in the driveway and Sandra's car was parked in the open garage. Herman told his family to wait by the front door while he went to the backyard to take a look. He noticed a plastic tarp hanging from the pergola on the back porch, which was evidence of Jamie's recent DIY project. Herman then went back to the front yard and decided to check the laundry room door inside the garage. If it was locked, he thought they would leave, but to his surprise, the door was unlocked. He entered the house, finding it dimly lit, gray and stuffy, with all the blinds closed. As he opened the front door, the dogs started barking and jumping around, creating an unsettling atmosphere. That was when they heard muffled screams. Herman rushed to the back of the house and found a large chair blocking the closet door in the bathroom. Inside, he found Sandra lying on the floor in a black satin nightgown, screaming for help. Herman and his wife Maria worked to free Sandra from the tight restraints that bound her arms and legs. To help, Herman got a pair of scissors from the bathroom. Meanwhile, Sandra repeatedly asked, "Where's Jamie?" She had visible bruises on her arms, including a dark one on her left bicep. After Herman and Maria finally freed her, Sandra rushed into the bedroom and found Jamie's lifeless body hidden in the closet, his feet sticking out. Despite it being clear that he was dead, given his cold, pale, and naked body, she still checked for a pulse. Sandra put a blue jacket on her injured husband Jamie, and with Maria's help, got him back to the bathroom. When the paramedics arrived, Sandra was extremely distraught, making it hard for her to talk to the first paramedic, Stephanie Roberts. According to Roberts' report, Sandra was in shock, crying periodically, and had lost track of time. Her last clear memory was around 1 a.m., and she was unaware that 15 hours had passed. The police noticed bruises on Sandra's hands and arms, as well as a small scratch on her left thumb, but no visible blood. Sandra told the police that after Jamie let the dogs in, she got out of the bathtub and went to her closet to get dressed. Then, she claimed to have no memory until she woke up in the closet at an unknown time, eventually screaming for help, but possibly falling back asleep due to a seizure. Sandra had several serious medical conditions, including lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and grand mal seizures, which had forced her to resign from her job as a licensed vocational nurse. In the weeks leading up to Jamie's murder, Sandra experienced warning signs of an impending seizure, known as auras. After a seizure, she would sleep for hours, then wake up feeling disoriented, confused, and in pain. During the investigation, Sandra was questioned by Sheriff Sergeants Shah Kazal and James Duay at the Harris County Sheriff's Office. Sandra felt uncomfortable in the cold interrogation room and asked to take a polygraph test, despite feeling cold and shaky. The 3-hour interrogation focused on the 36 hours leading up to Jamie's death. Sandra spoke softly and complained of having a headache. She recalled specific details about her activities, such as removing her boots in the bedroom and their conversation in the jacuzzi. However, she struggled to remember other details, and her memory was unclear. Sandra initially said Jamie had left her alone for 15 minutes to let the dogs in before she got out of the jacuzzi. Later, she thought it might have been around 5 minutes. She admitted to being bad at keeping track of time and was just making guesses about the timeline. When asked about their future plans, Sandra became overwhelmed and burst into tears. Cazal suggested that Sandra might have been involved in Jamie's death, which prompted Sandra to ask for a lawyer, saying she wasn't going to answer any more questions because she felt confused. Docu asked Sandra if she would take a polygraph test, but she refused, citing concerns about her nervousness, physical symptoms, and the potential for the results to be used against her. She wanted to consult with a lawyer first. Docu seemed frustrated by her refusal, implying that it suggested she had something to hide. He warned Sandra that the investigation would be thorough and that they would gather information about her, her husband, and their relationships with neighbors and family members. Sandra hoped the investigation would focus on someone else, insisting she wasn't involved in Jamie's murder. When asked about her relationship with her husband, she described it as great, even better lately. As the interrogation neared its end, the detectives grew frustrated with Sandra's claims of having no memory of the events. They pressed her, wondering how she could have been unaware of her husband being brutally stabbed in the bedroom just a few feet away, and why she hadn't heard his screams. Detective Cazal implored her to help, but Sandra repeatedly denied having heard anything, covering her face with her hands. Cazal and Docu left the cold, confined room, leaving Sandra crying with her face in her hands. Later, Cazal contacted the Harris County District Attorney's Office to file murder charges against Sandra. However, the DA's office ultimately decided not to pursue those charges due to a lack of evidence. 2 days after the murder, Liz met with Cazal and Docu, telling them that various items were missing from the house, including a TV and medication. She also shared information about her mother's health issues and seizures. Unfortunately, this meeting didn't lead to any significant breakthroughs in the case. Liz continued to call the authorities, asking about the progress of the investigation, but eventually, they stopped responding to her calls. A year and a half later, Sandra was quietly indicted for Jamie's murder by a grand jury. However, the grand jury proceedings were kept secret, leaving the public unaware of the discussions and evidence presented. Sandra's case moved slowly, passing from one prosecutor to another over the next 3 years. Finally, it landed on Colleen Barnett's desk in May 2017. Barnett was a seasoned prosecutor, with a reputation for being diligent and fair. Despite the challenges in the case, including no apparent motive, no confession, and no direct evidence linking Sandra to the crime, Barnett believed in the case. During the 13-day trial, Barnett portrayed Sandra as a calculating murderer who had planned Jamie's death. She claimed that Sandra had tied Jamie's feet with a gray telephone cord and then stabbed him with a knife. Barnett also highlighted the presence of a bag of sex toys found on the bed, which Sandra later claimed was a gag gift from a friend. Although Barnett couldn't pinpoint a motive for Sandra's actions, she presented various theories, including Jamie's life insurance policy and Sandra's supposed desire to end their marriage. Sandra's attorney, George Sechrist, presented a different perspective on the case, arguing that Sandra was a victim of investigators who had prematurely settled on a theory. He claimed that the lack of physical evidence connecting Sandra to the crime, including the absence of her blood at the scene and cuts on her hands, suggested that she was not involved. Instead, Sechrist proposed that Sandra had fallen prey to a home invasion, suffered a head injury, and was bound in her closet while intruders killed her husband. Prosecutor Barnett countered with expert testimony from Celestina Rossi, a blood spatter analyst and crime scene reconstructionist. Rossi testified that the crime scene did not match a home invasion scenario, citing the lack of forced entry, undisturbed dresser drawers, and a lit candle on Jamie's nightstand, indicating no struggle near the closet where Jamie was killed. The majority of the blood was confined to the closet, with spatter on a chair, medical stool, and comforter, which Rossi attributed to the injury to Jamie's artery. Rossi concurred with the medical examiner's report that Jamie's wounds were defensive and noted his loaded handgun near his body in the closet, untouched. This evidence, Rossi suggested, pointed to Sandra's guilt. The jury deliberated for 8 hours over several days before finding Sandra guilty of murder, sentencing her to 27 years in prison. The jury foreman later explained that they did not believe Sandra was a threat to society and wanted to give her a chance to see her grandchildren. When the verdict was read, Sandra let out a shriek and nearly collapsed into her seat. The courtroom, filled with supporters who believed in her innocence, was left in stunned disbelief. As Sandra was escorted out of the courtroom, she paused to embrace her daughter, Liz, one last time. Liz was devastated, feeling that the justice system had failed her family, taking away both her parents. Sandra's supporters were outraged at Barnett, accusing her of manipulating Sandra's words, exploiting her religious beliefs, and fabricating a false narrative that led to her imprisonment. In contrast, the jury foreman stood by the verdict, believing Barnett's version of events was the most plausible. He found Sandra's story inconsistent, citing her changing account of their return home and the time Jamie spent in the jacuzzi before she retreated to her closet. He also questioned the authenticity of her seizure that night, referencing her medical records, which indicated stable seizures, and her visit to the neurologist after the murder, during which she made no mention of the alleged seizure. The foreman stated that the more he listened to Sandra's statements, the more he realized they didn't make sense. He believed the evidence pointed to her guilt, but acknowledged that the jury could be wrong. A month after the verdict, Sandra's lawyer, Sechrist, filed a motion for a new trial, arguing that the investigation was inept, and the prosecution's case was built on conjecture and hypotheses with no solid evidence. Sechrist contended that Sandra was innocent, but Judge Johnson denied the motion, setting in motion a potentially lengthy appeals process. Sandra, seated behind a glass partition, maintained her innocence, softly asserting that she did not kill her husband. When asked who might have committed the crime, she replied, "I wish I knew." She clings to hope for a future release, whether through a successful appeal or parole, which she will be eligible for in 2031, when she will be 71 years old. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Tina Watson. Tina Watson was born in West Germany on February 13, 1977. She was adopted by Tommy and Cindy Thomas on January 24, 1980. Tina met her future husband, Gabe Watson, while attending the University of Alabama in Birmingham, and they started dating in January 2001. Tina was diagnosed with a heart condition called paroxysmal supraventricular tachycardia, PSVT. Despite this, she took diving lessons in January 2003 and earned her certification before marrying Gabe on October 11, 2003. At the time of their wedding, Gabe was a qualified rescue diver with 55 dives under his belt, while Tina had only dived 5 times. As Tina and Gabe's wedding day approached, Tina's anxiety grew. At 26 years old, she had already experienced 2 failed relationships and was now attempting marriage for the second time. Her first relationship with Scott McCulloch ended due to her mother's disapproval. Although her mother didn't have specific reasons, she wanted a better life for Tina and felt she was rushing into marriage. Tina and Scott eventually parted ways. Her second relationship with Stan Marks also failed, but this time, her parents weren't involved. They simply couldn't overcome their differences and mutually decided to end the relationship. It wasn't until Christmas Eve, at a party with friends, that Tina met Gabe Watson. Their relationship wasn't sparked by love at first sight, but rather by mutual support after recent breakups. 2 years into their relationship, Gabe proposed to Tina. Having learned from past experiences, Tina agreed, but only if she had her parents' blessing. In 2003, Gabe decided to ask Tina's parents for their blessing in a romantic gesture, choosing Valentine's Day. However, since Tina's father was away, the dinner was rescheduled for February 15th. During the dinner, Gabe announced his decision to spend the rest of his life with Tina. Tina's father, Tommy, responded with a straightforward question: "Do you love Tina?" However, instead of answering, Watson stuttered and remained silent. His father dismissed this reaction as mere awkwardness. Tommy then posed the same question to Tina, but she also avoided a direct answer. Instead, she expressed her fear of being alone at 26 years old. After considering their responses, Tommy gave his blessing to the young couple. The wedding preparations were well underway, with Tina preoccupied with her attire, guest list, and other details. Meanwhile, Watson was solely focused on planning their honeymoon. He had already decided on a trip to the Great Barrier Reef in the Pacific Ocean near Australia, where he intended to go diving. There isn't any consulting Tina about her preferences. To explore the sunken ship, Townsville Titanic, which sank in 1911, Gabe wanted Tina to learn scuba diving. However, Tina wasn't interested in diving, unlike Gabe, who was an experienced scuba diver with 55 dives under his belt. He had even completed a rescue diving course. Gabe would occasionally take Tina scuba diving in a pool with calm water and lifeguard supervision, but that was the extent of her experience. Gabe gave Tina an ultimatum: if she didn't learn to dive by their honeymoon, she would have to stay home while he went on his adventures. Gabe took out a loan to buy Tina her own diving equipment and pay for her lessons. However, Tina's first instructor was unimpressed with her skills and warned Gabe that she wasn't suited for open ocean diving. Gabe was furious and refused to listen, accusing the instructor of being a poor teacher and discontinuing the classes. The second instructor promptly gave Tina a passing grade, but also made a comment that she only made an effort to impress her future husband. Tina and Gabe got married on October 11th, and 2 days later, they embarked on a trip to Australia, which was funded by their wedding gifts totaling $10,000. During their honeymoon, Gabe dedicated some time to making Tina happy. They explored Sydney, visited the Sydney Aquarium, and went to the zoo. Although Tina was initially excited, her mood changed as they approached their visit to the Great Barrier Reef. On October 21st, they traveled to Townsville and boarded a boat in the evening, heading to a renowned destination popular among divers. However, employees at the diving company later reported that Tina and Gabe appeared inexperienced with diving equipment. Despite Gabe having completed diving courses and having some experience, he seemed uncertain about the equipment, handling it as if it were his first time. Before diving, Gabe assisted Tina in passing the required exam, which typically should be conducted individually. When the instructor offered Tina assistance underwater, she declined. The dive log noted a strong current that day, a crucial detail in the events that unfolded. As they prepared for the dive, Gabe helped Tina with the equipment they had purchased in the US. He rented an 11-liter tank for himself but chose an 8.5-liter tank for Tina, a volume considered small and potentially hazardous given her limited experience. Initially, the dive to the Townsville Titanic wreck was not possible. Tina needed an additional air tank, which stopped her from reaching the required depth. Furthermore, Gabe's underwater computer was not working. The computer calculates the needed diving and ascent speeds and shows the oxygen levels in the cylinders. After returning to the boat and resolving the computer issue, they attempted the dive again. The wreck was located 49 feet below the surface, and Tina was the first to descend, with Gabe following closely behind. According to Gabe's account, everything seemed normal at first. However, at some point, Tina stopped, began waving at him, and then signaled that she wanted to ascend. Gabe immediately recognized that she was panicking, which was not an uncommon occurrence for her. As they were already halfway to the surface, Gabe decided to calm Tina down and maintain their current depth for a while, rather than continuing the dive, allowing her to psychologically adjust to the pressure. Gabe said that Tina had been breathing deeply, which had not been safe, and Gabe had seen that Tina was starting to sink. Gabe had attempted to grab her belt to keep her afloat, but Tina had swung her arm forcefully, knocking his mask off. As Gabe had quickly put his mask back on, Tina Tina had drifted further away. Gabe had tried swimming towards her but had been unable to reach her. Gabe had then made the decision to return to the surface to seek help from the lifeguards. During his ascent, Gabe had met 2 other swimmers, but despite his attempts to signal for help, the swimmer had ignored him. It's worth noting that there were 2 Asian men in the vicinity, but neither corroborated Gabe's account of seeking help. Subsequent police analysis of underwater computer readings revealed that Gabe had indeed attempted to swim after his wife for a short while before giving up. However, his ascent to the surface was controlled, as he stopped at each designated depth level as instructed. Other divers at the scene claimed that Gabe had sufficient opportunity to rescue his wife, but failed to act. The incident occurred early in the dive, and Gabe had enough oxygen to swim to the bottom and back to the surface. Rescuers on the ship responded quickly, locating Tina's body at a depth of 82 feet. Despite their efforts, including 40 minutes of artificial respiration on the deck, Tina was pronounced dead. Witnesses reported that Gabe kept his distance from his wife's body, appearing indifferent to the situation, and even exhibiting carefree behavior such as smiling with other passengers on the way to shore, which he later denied in court. The autopsy results for Tina revealed some inconsistencies. Although there were no obvious signs of a violent death, there were bruises on her neck and blood in her nostrils. However, these findings are not unusual given the 82-foot depth at which her body was discovered. Toxicology tests showed no alcohol in her system, but high levels of ibuprofen and paracetamol, which are commonly used to treat seasickness. A small amount of fluid was found in her lungs. The official cause of death was listed as drowning, but it is possible that she was already oxygen deprived before succumbing to drowning. Tina's diving gear was inspected by the Australian Water Police, but no issues were found. Initially, the police could have dismissed the incident as an accident caused by an inexperienced diver neglecting safety protocols, a sadly common occurrence. However, there were some suspicious aspects to the case, such as the inconclusive autopsy results. Additionally, Watson's unusual behavior, as reported by the diving team, didn't align with the expected actions of a grieving husband. These inconsistencies made it difficult to close the case, leading to a prolonged investigation. Gabe began to suspect that the detectives were investigating him. Furthermore, Tina's parents refused to accept the incident as a tragic accident and sought to hold their son-in-law accountable either for their daughter's death or for failing to assist her. The police observed that the suspect, Gabe, was in a state of shock. He displayed erratic behavior, crying and laughing uncontrollably, and twitching nervously. Gabe requested to call his father and complained of ear pain. He also begged his father to inform his wife's parents about the tragic event. Later that night, Gabe was released from police custody. He proceeded to the yacht owned by the company that had organized the diving trip to the reef. Gabe asked the company for a place to stay for the night, citing that the trip was initially supposed to last 2 days but was cut short due to his wife's death. He also requested a partial refund for the dive, as he never got to see the sunken ship. On October 24th, Gabe's mother arrived in Townsville to support her son and help him find a lawyer. At Gabe's request, they visited the morgue, where he wanted to see his wife one last time. Although Gabe was still considered a suspect, his actions were those of a grieving husband. He cried, held his wife's hand, and begged for her forgiveness, unaware that a police officer was standing outside, recording his actions on a tape recorder. Detective Lawrence questioned Gabe in court about his earlier statement next to Tina at the morgue, "I didn't mean to hurt you." Lawrence sought clarification on what Gabe meant by it. Gabe had been traveling home with his wife's body and had a layover in Oakland. During this time, he sought medical attention for a sore ear and was held for evaluation at the airport. The investigation suggested that Gabe did this to avoid meeting Tina's father. However, it was revealed that ear problems are common among divers, which may have explained Gabe's condition. At Tina's funeral on November 5th, Gabe met with his father-in-law, Watson. In a visible gesture, Gabe removed his wife's wedding ring and placed it on his finger, covering his own ring. He also removed her earrings and handed them to Watson. After this encounter, the Thomas family did not interact with Gabe again that day. Later in the trial, Gabe was questioned about removing his wife's jewelry during her funeral. He simply smiled and shrugged, seemingly unwilling to confirm or deny it. Those who knew Gabe had mixed opinions about his character. Some found him to be kind and amusing, while others considered him cruel and controlling. However, they all agreed that Gabe and his wife, Tina, appeared unhappy together. Tina's friends corroborated what she had shared with her father at a family dinner on February 15th, that she had married Gabe out of fear of being alone and that this decision ultimately led to her demise. Furthermore, one of Tina's friends revealed that Tina had confided in her about being taken to an insurance company by Gabe, where she was forced to purchase a life insurance policy at an inflated rate, naming Gabe as the beneficiary. This account was verified by the insurance agent, who confirmed the details. The cab driver who drove Gabe and Tina to their yacht also testified that Tina had cried throughout the ride, while Gabe ignored her. Another friend of Tina's, Amanda Phillips, came forward with a disturbing story that shed more light on the true nature of Gabe and Tina's relationship. It was revealed that Gabe had secretly recorded Tina using the bathroom, edited the footage, and incorporated it into a Christmas celebration video. That would have been acceptable, but he chose to do it in front of a full house of guests during a general viewing. As everyone tried to explain to him that his actions were in poor taste, he laughed loudly while they gestured in frustration, tapping their fingers against their temples. Although removing jewelry during a funeral may seem like a shocking and condemnatory act by Gabe, a more disturbing incident occurred in 2008. During the trial, the jury was shown footage of Watson visiting Tina's grave, taking all the flowers, and carrying them away. The flowers were later found in a nearby trash can. Tina's father had noticed the missing flowers and set up a hidden camera among the monuments to catch the thief. However, he was shocked to see Gabe on the tape and was outraged by his actions. In court, Gabe claimed that he and his wife had discussed their own death on an extreme honeymoon and that she had requested no flowers on her grave. This excuse sounded strange and unlikely. Gabe claimed that Tina drowned while he attempted to put a mask on her face underwater. However, it was later revealed that this was impossible without an additional air source, which in this case was Tina's oxygen supply. In November 2008, Australian authorities arrested Gabe. His trial began on June 5, 2009, where he pleaded guilty to failing to save his wife. As a result, he was charged with negligent homicide and sentenced to 18 months in prison. Upon completing his sentence, Gabe returned to the U.S. However, a year later, he was charged with first-degree murder by a U.S. court. The prosecution alleged that his motive was to collect insurance payouts following his wife's death. Gabe's lawyer defended him by shifting the blame onto the diving company, claiming that its employees had failed to ensure tourist safety and were now afraid of losing their business due to potential license revocation. Regarding the insurance payout, Gabe received $33,000. However, he spent significantly more on lawyers and additional expert analysis. Despite this, the prosecution maintained that Gabe's expenditure was an attempt to avoid suspicion, as he could not assume he would be believed. The prosecutor also disputed the fact that Gabe, who had a degree in drowning rescue, was unable to save his wife. Gabe addressed the jury, reflecting on the past 7 years since the tragedy. He expressed that he has thought about that terrible day every day, and the public has blamed him, calling him a murderer. Gabe noted that nobody has shown him understanding or empathy, except for his late wife's parents, who he understands will never forgive him. Gabe acknowledged that he can be accused of not doing enough to save his wife, Tina, but he believes he has already been punished for that. He stated that he was afraid to die and wanted to live, which is why he didn't drown with his wife 7 years ago. Gabe emphasized that he still wants to live now. The court found no evidence of Gabe's guilt, and the jury declared him not guilty. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lori Vallow. Lori Vallow was born on June 26, 1973, in Loma Linda, California. She grew up in a large family with 2 older brothers and 3 sisters. Her parents, Denise and Barry Cox, worked hard to provide for their children. Lori was especially close to her brother Alex, who always looked out for her and protected her, even during her school years. As she grew older, Lori became a beautiful and charismatic young woman with many admirers. She was a blonde with a slender figure and a captivating smile. She enjoyed being the center of attention and was a spirited and adventurous person. In the spring of 1992, at the age of 18, Lori married her high school sweetheart, Nelson Yanes. However, the young couple soon realized they had rushed into marriage and were not ready for family life. As a result, their marriage ended in less than a year. They did not have any children together. In the fall of 1995, Lori remarried, this time to a man named William Leah. A year later, they had a son named Colby. However, their marriage ended in 1998, just 2 years later. Lori retained custody of her son. In 2001, Lori married Joseph Anthony Ryan, who adopted her son from a previous marriage the following year. They also had a daughter, Tylee. However, this marriage ended in 2005. Shortly after, Joseph visited their children and got into an altercation with Lori's brother, Alex. Alex claimed he was defending Lori's honor, as Joseph had insulted her. As a result, Lori was fined and received a short prison sentence. After her divorce, Lori met Charles Anthony Vallow and married him in February 2006. Charles was 17 years older than Lori, but this significant age difference didn't pose a problem for they. Charles had 2 teenage sons, Zachary and Nicholas, from previous relationships. The family initially lived in Nevada, where Lori's children from previous marriages resided, while Charles's sons visited during holidays or weekends. Charles owned a small business that provided a stable income to support the family. Lori did not work, but Charles never criticized her for it. In 2014, they officially adopted Charles's grandnephew, Joshua Jackson Vallow, also known as JJ, who had autism. The family was able to provide JJ with the expensive therapy he needed. By the end of 2014, the family decided to move to the Hawaiian Islands. By this time, Colby and Charles's older children were living on their own, so the Vallow family moved to the island with just the 4 of them, Lori, Charles, Tylee, and JJ. They settled in a popular tourist area and decided to open a beach bar, specializing in fresh juices, smoothies, and non-alcoholic cocktails. Despite their efforts and Charles's experience in trade, the business struggled to compete and ultimately failed. Around this time, Lori developed an interest in spiritual literature and became particularly drawn to a series of books called Standing in Holy Places by Chad Daybell. She was deeply captivated by his views and ideas, becoming almost obsessed with his writings, and began reading his books daily. In 2016, Lori Vallow and her family were forced to leave Hawaii and relocate to the mainland, eventually settling in Arizona. While her husband Charles worked hard to provide for the family, Lori became increasingly obsessed with her faith, drifting away from reality. 2 years later, in October 2018, Lori and her friend Melanie attended a seminar called Preparing People for the Second Coming of Christ in a nearby town, led by Chad Daybell. Lori was a huge fan of Daybell and was thrilled to meet him in person. She sat in the front row, captivated by his words, and caught his attention. After the event, Daybell engaged with his followers, and Lori stayed behind to talk to him. She was drawn to him and asked if she could touch his hand. Daybell, looking into her eyes, told her that they had been husband and wife in 7 past lives. Chad and Lori started communicating regularly a few weeks after exchanging contact information. When Lori's husband traveled to Nevada for work, Lori invited Chad to host a gathering at her home, which drew around a dozen people. They discussed God and the Judgment Day. Lori and Chad began working together to prepare people for what they believed would be a catastrophic judgment. They started producing podcasts, leading sermons, and writing articles on the topic. As Lori became more engrossed in her newfound faith, she began to detach from reality and her family. Charles didn't immediately realize the full extent of the change, believing it to be a passing phase that would soon go away. However, by the time Charles realized the severity of the situation, it was too late. Lori's beliefs became increasingly extreme, and she started talking about battling dark spirits and zombies. She claimed that God had chosen her for a special mission to destroy these evil entities. Charles's efforts to bring his wife back to reality were unsuccessful, and she started to view him as a malevolent entity that needed to be eliminated. By the end of 2018, the marriage between Lori and Charles was on the verge of collapse. In February 2019, while Charles was away on a week-long business trip, Lori changed the locks on their shared home. When Charles returned, he found himself locked out of his own house, his personal car and family truck were missing, and a significant amount of $35,000 had been withdrawn from his account. Charles tried to enter the house, calling out for his wife, but Lori, in a frantic state, rushed outside, shouting threats and curses. She claimed that her husband's soul had long been dead, and his body was possessed by a demon, repeatedly saying, "I don't know who you are and what you've done with my husband." Charles immediately went to the police station to report Lori for stealing from him, blocking access to his home and children, and threatening him with physical harm. As a result, a protective order was issued, which prohibited Lori from approaching him. During the police interview, Charles expressed concerns about Lori's extreme religious behavior, her claims that the world was ending soon, and her tendency to label people as either good or evil. Although the officers seemed skeptical and even made fun of Charles, they still issued the protective order. The next day, Charles filed for divorce and changed the beneficiary of his $1 million life insurance policy from Lori to his mother and sister. According to his lawyer, Charles was worried about the well-being of his son JJ, who needed special care. He trusted that his mother and sister would manage the insurance payout responsibly and take care of JJ if anything happened to him. Months later, in an attempt to reconcile with his wife Lori and salvage their marriage, Charles made a critical error. He dropped the restraining order that had been protecting him. As a result, Charles began visiting Lori at her home, driven by a desire to reconnect with his children and revive his relationship. Tragically, on July 11, 2019, Charles's bid at reconciliation ended in disaster. When he arrived at the house, he was shot twice in the chest and killed. Lori's brother, Alex, admitted to the shooting and called 911. He claimed he acted in self-defense, alleging that Charles had attacked him first with a baseball bat. According to Alex, he responded by firing his pistol twice without taking aim. Witnesses to the shooting included the homeowner and the children. Although their testimonies were slightly inconsistent, the court ultimately ruled Charles's death an unintentional killing in self-defense. It's worth noting that Alex sustained only minor injuries. On the same day Charles's body was taken to the morgue, Lori hosted a party at their house, complete with music, numerous guests, and a poolside disco in the exact spot where her husband had been shot, with visible bloodstains still present. Strangely, she made no arrangements for his funeral and didn't inform anyone about his death. It wasn't until a week later, when Charles's unclaimed body remained in the morgue, that his sons, mother, sister, and other relatives learned of his passing. Lori's life took a dramatic turn after her husband's death. She sold their home in Arizona and moved to Rexburg, Idaho, with her children. They settled in the same housing complex as her brother Alex Cox and his wife, Tammy. Lori enrolled her son in a special needs school, but her 16-year-old daughter, Tylee, did not attend any school. As a result, many neighbors were unaware that Lori even had a second child, as Tylee was rarely seen outside. Around the same time, Lori made a disturbing comment about her daughter, referring to her as a dark entity in a phone conversation with a friend. On September 8, 2019, Lori, her children, and her brother Alex went on a trip to Yellowstone Park, where they met up with Chad. Several photos from the trip show Tylee, but after that day, she was never seen again. 2 weeks later, on September 24, 2019, Lori withdrew her son's documents from the special needs school, claiming she would homeschool him. Chad's 49-year-old wife, Tammy, died suddenly on October 19, less than a month after her husband's affair with Lori began. According to Chad, Tammy had been suffering from a cold and cough, and it was presumed that she died from respiratory failure in her sleep. There were no signs of violence on her body, and her death was ruled natural. However, Chad refused to allow an autopsy to determine the cause of death, a decision that raised no suspicions at the time. Following Tammy's passing, Chad received approximately $500,000 in insurance payouts. 2 weeks after Tammy's death, Chad and Lori traveled to the Hawaiian Islands, where they got married in a beachside ceremony. This news came as a shock to Chad's children, who were still grieving the loss of their mother and struggled to understand their father's actions. After returning to Arizona, they lived together and misled others by claiming that Lori's children were staying with relatives or that she didn't have any children at all. They also rented a storage unit and moved the children's belongings there, essentially erasing them from their home. On December 12, 2019, approximately 1 month later, Alex unexpectedly died at his home, appearing to have suffered a heart attack. At his family's request, no autopsy was performed, and his death was attributed to natural causes. As time went on, more and more people began inquiring about the whereabouts of Lori's children. She skillfully deceived her neighbors and acquaintances with lies, but it was more challenging to convince her relatives. Colby, Lori's eldest son, who had lost touch with his mother after moving away, made an effort to reconnect with his younger sister. However, Lori initially pretended to be her daughter, Tylee, when Colby contacted her. He soon became suspicious that something was amiss. Meanwhile, Charles Vallow's relatives were concerned about the welfare of his grandchild, JJ, and repeatedly requested to visit or contact him. Lori consistently denied or made up excuses to prevent them from seeing the boy. The situation escalated when JJ's grandmother reported his disappearance to the police. Colby also approached the authorities to help locate his younger sister. When police officers visited Lori's home to speak with the children, she lied about their whereabouts, claiming they were visiting relatives. After this information proved false, the police gave Lori an ultimatum. She had a week to appear at the police station with the children. Instead, she and her husband fled to Hawaii. On February 20, 2020, Lori was arrested on the island of Kauai and taken back to Arizona. A search of Lori and Chad's home was conducted, but no signs of the missing children, Tylee and JJ, were found. Initially, Chad had defended Lori, claiming she didn't have any children, but now he was also under suspicion. It wasn't until June 9 that police discovered human remains buried in their backyard. Forensic analysis confirmed that the bodies were those of Ty and JJ. Further investigation led to the exhumation of the bodies of Tammy Daybell and Alex Cox to determine the true causes of their deaths. Toxicology reports revealed the presence of chemicals that could induce heart failure, suggesting that their deaths were not natural. Lori and Chad's trial began in January 2021. They faced charges of conspiracy, first-degree criminal acts, grand theft, deceit, and insurance fraud. Additionally, the circumstances surrounding Charles Vallow's death were reclassified from self-defense to premeditated murder. In court, witnesses testified that Lori referred to her children as dark entities and claimed she wanted to save their souls. There were allegations that the deaths of Tylee and JJ may have been ritualistic in nature. Notably, Tylee's body was partially burned, and Chad had previously sent Lori an email categorizing people, including Tylee, as having dark spirits. Lori and her husband, Chad, were both facing the possibility of capital punishment due to the severity of the charges against them. However, in May 2021, Lori's defense team successfully argued that she was incompetent to stand trial, bringing the proceedings to a halt. Meanwhile, all 5 of Chad's adult children maintained that their father was innocent and had been framed by Lori and her co-conspirator. After receiving treatment at a psychiatric facility, Lori was deemed fit to stand trial again in 2022. In March 2023, the judge ruled that capital punishment would not be an option for Lori, a decision that the prosecution is still trying to appeal. Lori was ultimately sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole in July 2023. Chad's trial is ongoing, and he still faces the possibility of capital punishment. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Rob Andrew. Brenda Evers, the future wife of Rob Andrew, was born on December 16, 1963, in Enid, Oklahoma. She grew up in a devout Christian family that prioritized faith and family values. Her childhood was filled with regular family meals, group prayers, and church attendance. As a result, Brenda developed into a quiet and peaceful individual who excelled academically and spent much of her free time volunteering at church. As a high school student, Brenda was a cheerleader for the soccer team and enjoyed dancing, but she avoided parties and social gatherings. She aspired to be like her mother, who was a model of piety and modesty. Brenda's goal was to become a housewife after marriage, devoting herself to her husband and children. At the age of 17, Brenda met her first love, Rob Andrew, who was the older brother of her friend. Despite their different denominational backgrounds, Rob was a Baptist and Brenda a Lutheran. They shared conservative views on life, a strong faith, and a dream of building a large and close-knit family. The friendly relationship between them blossomed into something more. Although they were separated by 125 miles when she started college in Winfield, Kansas, they maintained regular communication. To be closer to her partner, Brenda transferred to a university in Stillwater, Ohio, a year later. They eventually got married in the summer of 1984. As Rob's career took off, he received a job offer in Houston, Texas. Although he had initially hesitated, Brenda convinced him to take the opportunity. While Rob thrived as an advertising manager, Brenda completed her degree and secured a job in banking. She fell in love with the city's vibrant nightlife, impressive skyscrapers, and fast-paced lifestyle. Her time in Texas brought about a transformation in Brenda, as she overcame her initial shyness and developed a more outgoing personality. She started taking care of her appearance, dressing fashionably, wearing makeup, and building a large social network. Rob was unhappy with the changes he saw in his wife. He believed a woman of faith should be more subdued. Additionally, Rob was homesick and eager to return to his old life. When he was offered his old job back at an advertising agency in Oklahoma City, he jumped at the opportunity. However, Brenda was not supportive of his decision. They argued about it, but eventually found a compromise. They agreed that Rob would settle in the new location, find a suitable house, and if everything worked out, Brenda would join him. They lived apart for a few months, but eventually reunited. In the early 1990s, they moved into a luxurious house in the upscale neighborhood of Lansbrook. Brenda gave birth to a daughter 9 months later. She even quit her job to become a full-time homemaker and devote herself to raising their child. For years later, they welcomed the son Parker. It seemed like they had the perfect life: love, children, a beautiful home, and financial security. On November 20th, 2001, Rob had arranged to pick up the children from his ex-wife to spend the holiday with them. At the time, they were divorced. In the evening, Brenda greeted him at the door and asked him to go to the garage to help her with some faulty equipment. Rob was bending down when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned around, and a gunshot rang out. Around 6 p.m., emergency services received a call from Brenda Andrew. She reported that she was injured and her husband was dead. An ambulance rushed to the scene, where paramedics found a horrific scene in the garage. A man lay in a pool of blood, dead from a gunshot wound. His wife, Brenda, was shot in the arm but alive. Brenda's clothes were stained with blood, and she appeared detached from the situation. The paramedics believed she was in shock. She told them that she tried to give Rob first aid, but she thought he was dead. Brenda's hand was bandaged, and she was taken to the hospital. As the ambulance left, police began investigating the scene. They found a .22 caliber bullet lodged in the wall and a shotgun shell casing, indicating that multiple weapons were used. The officers also noticed that the victim still had his wallet on him, ruling out robbery as a motive. At the clinic, Brenda explained that she and Andrew were together when two masked and armed men suddenly entered the garage. Although she couldn't make out what they were shouting, one of the men shot Andrew twice, and the other wounded her as she tried to escape. The attackers then quickly fled the scene. Brenda claimed that Andrew was a kind and helpful person who didn't have any enemies. She acknowledged feeling frightened by the attack, especially since there were children in the house at the time. However, her account raised suspicions, and the police noticed several inconsistencies in her story. Notably, she mentioned that the children were present during the attack, but it was clear that they had not been prepared for a trip, contradicting her earlier statement. Interviews with neighbors yielded no useful information. To gain insight into Brenda and Rob's personal life, detectives questioned their friends and acquaintances, revealing marital problems since their second child's birth. Friends and Pastor Andrew reported that Rob confided in them about Brenda's abusive behavior and her hatred for their marriage. Ronnie Street, a close friend of the Roberts family, observed that Brenda's behavior had become unusual. She was open about her feelings, even with strangers, and her husband Rob seemed to love her unconditionally, forgiving her for her antics. Friends of the family noted that Brenda had undergone a significant change from being a typical housewife to someone with loose morals. There was substantial evidence to support these claims. Brenda seemed to be having a midlife crisis, dressing more provocatively and becoming secretive towards her husband. Rob soon discovered she was having an affair, which began in October 1997 with Rick Nunley, a co-worker from the Oklahoma bank. Brenda was married, but secretly dated someone for a year and then maintained occasional phone contact. She then started an affair with James Higgins, a local store owner, who was drawn to her bold style and flirting. They met secretly in a hotel room once or twice a week for about 5 years. Meanwhile, Brenda's husband, Rob, remained unaware of her infidelity. However, he couldn't help but notice that their marriage was falling apart. His wife had become distant, rarely speaking to him or spending time with him. Rob tried his best to hold the family together, hoping that things would eventually improve. In 2001, Brenda ended her affair with Higgins, but not because she wanted to salvage her marriage. Instead, she was sinking deeper into a life of immorality and vice. Around this time, a new Baptist church had opened in Oklahoma City, largely thanks to the efforts of Brenda's husband, Rob. He became a deacon at the church, and Brenda taught Sunday school. From the outside, it seemed like they were a perfect, moral family. Brenda, a devoted wife, taught her children about faith and community. She met James Pavitt, a part-time teacher and friend of Rob, who was drawn to her charm. As their relationship blossomed in 2001, they kept it secret but eventually became open about their feelings. Rob's suspicions of Brenda's infidelity led to a heated argument and separation. James also ended his marriage. While Rob hoped to reconcile, Brenda filed for divorce. A mysterious phone call and car malfunction followed, leading Rob to suspect James and Brenda were behind the attempt on his life. He reported his concerns to the police, raising questions about what drove him to make such a claim. Rob Andrew and his wife Brenda's divorce was already settled, including a custody agreement for their children. However, a large insurance policy taken out by James Pavitt could still financially benefit Brenda upon Rob's death. In fact, just months prior, James had sold Rob an $800,000 life insurance policy, listing Brenda as the sole beneficiary. This raised suspicions about Brenda's involvement in the recent violent attack on Rob. Detectives discovered that Brenda's new lover, James Pavitt, was involved in the insurance scheme and that Rob had tried to remove Brenda from the policy 2 weeks before the incident, but James refused, citing that only Brenda could make changes as the beneficiary. Rob didn't take his former friend's word for it, so he decided to investigate further by speaking with management. What he found out was shocking. Brenda and James had tried to forge the insurance policy by transferring ownership to Brenda, falsifying Rob's signature and backdating the document. However, Rob was assured by Pavitt's superiors that he still owned the policy and that only the policyholder could make changes to the contract. When James found out about this, he was furious, as this discovery was the reason for his termination. In a separate development, an inspection at the neighbor's house, the Gigstad's family, yielded an unexpected result. A fired shell casing from the shotgun in question was found on the bedroom floor, and several .22 caliber bullets were found in the attic. At the time of the crime, the Gigstad couple was not home, and there were no signs of forced entry. Mrs. Gigstad revealed that she had given a spare key of their home to Brenda Andrew. Additional, James's daughter, provided another crucial piece of evidence. On the day of the crime, she had lent her car to her father, who promised to have it repaired. However, when James returned the vehicle, Joanna noticed that the repairs had not been made. Moreover, she found a .22 caliber bullet in the car, which she thought was suspicious. When she told her father about the bullet, he instructed her to get rid of it. Further investigation revealed that James had purchased a handgun just a week before the attack. This new information led detectives to plan a questioning of James and Brenda. The funeral of Rob Andrews was held on November 23rd, but it was notable for the absence of Brenda, her children, and James Pavitt. Their failure to attend the ceremony raised many questions among family and friends, and also sparked concern among the police. It soon became apparent that the missing individuals had fled, leaving behind a trail of suspicion and unanswered questions. The police had a breakthrough in the case. They had identified the suspects and received the autopsy results. However, Brenda's account of the attack contradicted the forensic evidence. The police discovered that 2 different guns were used in the attack, and the injuries sustained by Rob and Brenda differed from the description provided by Brenda. The investigation revealed that the first shot was fired from a shotgun at a distance, but the second shot came from a .22 caliber pistol at close range. The same pistol was used to shoot Brenda's arm. Analysis of the bloodstains on the fabric showed that the shooter was standing near the victim when the second shot was fired. The angle of the blood matched the shooter's position, indicating that Brenda was the one who fired the second shot at Rob. Brenda and James were officially named suspects and a warrant was issued for their arrest. However, they had a substantial lead and had already gone into hiding. The police notified border officials to be on the lookout for them, but they had vanished. It eventually became clear that James and Brenda had fled to another country, with Mexico being the suspected destination. To capture the fugitives, the authorities froze their bank accounts, assuming that without access to their funds, they would eventually surface. This strategy proved effective, and 3 months later, James reached out to his daughter, Joanna, requesting that she send him money. Unbeknownst to James, Joanna was secretly working with the investigators. Joanna had long suspected her father's involvement in the crime, as he had been secretive and evasive with her. She recalled a previous incident where he had asked her boyfriend to pose as a doctor and call Rob, informing him that his wife was ill. It led them to discover that James and Brenda were secretly staying in Cancun, Mexico. In February 2002, James Pavitt and Brenda Andrew were arrested at the border and turned over to U.S. authorities. They were charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit a felony. The children were placed in the care of their paternal grandparents. During the investigation, neither James nor Brenda cooperated or pleaded guilty. James was the first to stand trial. The prosecution presented a strong case, highlighting James' background as an Army sniper and his experience with firearms. The court also heard about James' affair with Brenda and his attempts to prevent Rob Andrew from removing Brenda as a beneficiary. The jury considered the testimony of James' daughter and physical evidence found at the scene. James was found guilty and sentenced to death. Brenda's trial followed, but it was more dramatic and revealing than James'. The prosecution focused on Brenda's personality and history of infidelity, calling her former lovers to testify. They portrayed her as someone lacking in faith and integrity. When the prosecutor questioned Brenda about her husband's murder, she claimed to be innocent and asked to be set free, citing her faith. However, the prosecutor presented a different image of Brenda, portraying her as a woman who didn't love her husband, cheated on him, and killed him for selfish reasons. To support his argument, the prosecutor showed the contents of a suitcase Brenda had taken to Mexico, which included lingerie and a book about seduction techniques. He questioned whether a grieving widow would flee her husband's funeral. In contrast, the defense team attempted to depict Brenda as a victim of the events that transpired. The defense attorney pointed out that Brenda was also injured during the attack, but forensic experts concluded that she had shot herself in the arm. The defense then produced a letter allegedly written by James, confessing to the crimes. However, handwriting analysis revealed that the document was actually forged by Brenda Andrew herself. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury delivered a guilty verdict, and Brenda Andrew was sentenced to death. Despite Brenda's repeated appeals, her conviction has been upheld. The crimes committed by Brenda and James are extremely disturbing. What makes their case even more troubling is that they presented themselves as devout and moral individuals who taught children right from wrong. This hypocrisy raises serious concerns, as people who preach one thing but do not practice it in their own lives can be unpredictable and devoid of empathy. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Courtney Holden. The Holden family, a typical American household in Spokane. Judy and John Holden, who had 2 grown daughters living independently, also had an adopted son, Joshua, who still lived with them. Joshua, a quiet and introverted young man, had not yet started his own family and remained at home. The Holden's family approach to childcare was unconventional. The family saw fostering as a way to earn a steady income through government benefits. Judy's background and experience as a mother earned the authorities' trust. 4-year-old Courtney Holden, born on February 28, 1992, had been living in a shelter for 2 years when her life took a dramatic turn. In 1996, Courtney moved to Spokane to join the Holden family, comprised of Joshua and several other foster children. The little girl's heart was filled with hope for a loving and caring family. However, her dreams were short-lived. From a young age, Courtney was forced to bear the burden of excessive household chores. She was responsible for cleaning the entire house and washing dishes for every meal. If she made even the slightest mistake, she faced punishment. Life in the Holden home quickly became a nightmare, surpassing the hardships she experienced in the house. What was surprising was that the Holdens treated the other foster children with kindness, but they showed inexplicable hatred towards Courtney. Judy Holden was already an adult when Courtney joined the family, and Courtney was the last child they took from the orphanage. This might be the reason for their unusual behavior towards her. Courtney was subjected to strict rules, including being forbidden from going outside without permission. Visitors to the Holden home often witnessed Judy and Joshua mistreating Courtney, calling her Cinderella in a derogatory manner. Courtney found herself in a difficult situation, but she was a resilient girl who adapted to the harsh conditions over time. She learned to fear her foster mother and was terrified of her brother Joshua, who prohibited her from socializing with friends and peers. She was not allowed to have a mobile phone or other modern conveniences, and she only left the house when necessary and with permission. The only time she enjoyed some freedom were when the house was empty and she could step out into the backyard or chat with neighbors. As she grew into an adult, Courtney became accustomed to her life and learned to treat her foster parents with respect, despite their mistreatment. She did not become bitter, as she had no concept of a normal family life to compare hers to. Courtney's life improved significantly when her brother Joshua moved out of the house due to disagreements with their parents. This newfound freedom allowed her to come and go as she pleased, spend time with friends, and enjoy activities she had previously been restricted from. As a result, Courtney finally felt happy. As time passed, Courtney graduated from school and met a man named Michael, with whom she fell deeply in love. Michael treated her with kindness and care, a stark contrast to her previous experiences. Their relationship flourished, and they welcomed a son together in 2011. However, things took a surprising turn when Michael asked Courtney to move in with him and start a life together as a family. Despite his requests, Courtney chose to remain in her parents' house and ended her romantic relationship with Michael. By this time, the Holden house had become empty, as the foster children had grown up and moved out. Courtney's foster father, John Holden, had passed away, leaving her to live with her foster mother, Judy, and her child. Michael was allowed to visit his son, but only with Judy's permission. During Joshua's absence, Courtney's life with her son was relatively peaceful. However, after their father's death in 2014, Joshua returned and began to harass the family. He installed numerous surveillance cameras around the house, posting signs that read, "Smile, you're on camera." The cameras made Courtney anxious, as she knew that leaving the house would likely result in trouble from Joshua. Courtney's life took a turn for the worse around 2015. She confided in a neighbor that Joshua had taken away her freedom, forbidding her from having a phone, using social media, talking to outsiders, driving, or leaving the house without his permission. He also forced her to cut ties with Michael after the child's birth. Despite this, Courtney remained silent and compliant. Neighbors noticed bruises on Courtney's face and arms and asked her about them. She openly admitted that Joshua was physically abusing her. The neighbors were concerned and tried to help her, even contacting the police. However, the Holdens were able to dismiss the cases because Courtney never publicly acknowledged the abuse. As time went on, Courtney was no longer allowed to talk to her neighbors, who only saw her outside in the evenings. She obeyed Joshua's rules without question. Those who knew Joshua described him as a large and intimidating man with a cruel and unpredictable nature. He was also known to be paranoid and prone to insults. Joshua had a history of violent behavior and had even boasted about being able to kill someone and dispose of their body with ease. In 2005, he was charged with assault and harassment, but the case was dropped due to lack of evidence and the victim's refusal to cooperate with the police. There were also suspicions that he had committed assault and misconduct against a woman in 2003, but he was never identified as the perpetrator. In 2006, Joshua was arrested for domestic violence against his mother and for burglary, leading to him leaving home for several years. The last message Courtney sent to a friend on Facebook, nearly 2 years ago, was a desperate cry for help. "I have to go. I must leave. Josh is coming." After that, her account went silent. Family acquaintances described the dynamics within the Holden household as strange and controlling. They were particularly puzzled by the fact that Courtney's child referred to Joshua's mother, Judy, as Mom and Joshua as Dad, while Courtney was referred to only by her first name. In August 2018, a heated argument escalated, prompting Courtney to try to leave, but Joshua, larger and stronger, physically restrained her and carried her back inside. It's the last time she was seen outside the household. It wasn't until nearly 2 years later, in October 2019, that concerns about Courtney's disappearance began to grow. Michael and his girlfriend, who had not seen Courtney in almost 2 years, started to worry about her whereabouts. He was eager to see his child, filed a missing person report with the police on October 24th, sparking an investigation into Courtney's disappearance. The Holdens claimed that Courtney had abandoned her child and fled. However, they could not explain who was continuing to access her Social Security benefits and electronic food stamps. On the same day as the search, Joshua and Judy withdrew the remaining $600 from Courtney's bank account. The next day, a woman claiming to be Courtney called the National Center for Criminal Information, stating that she was safe and did not want to be searched for. However, the police discovered that she was actually one of Courtney's stepsisters. As the investigation continued, Joshua and Judy provided multiple conflicting accounts of Courtney's disappearance. They claimed that she had run away with a truck driver, and later, that she had left with a secret lover. The inconsistencies in their stories, combined with Courtney's unexplained absence, raised suspicions that the Holdens were hiding something. In October 2019, Joshua and Judy Holden suddenly left Spokane, further arousing the suspicions of detectives investigating the disappearance of Courtney. The Holdens' family flight from the area strengthened the detectives' conviction that they were involved in Courtney's disappearance. The investigation into Courtney's disappearance continued, and the Spokane Police Department attempted a welfare check in early October, which quickly escalated into a missing person case. The case was assigned to Major Crimes Detective Randy Lesser, who has spoken publicly about the investigation. The information gathered from police interviews and court records has shed light on the events surrounding Courtney's disappearance. When Lesser visited the house in early October, Judy told him that Courtney had been home just a few days prior. She claimed that Courtney had left on foot with her son. However, when Lesser asked for Judy's phone number, she became hostile and locked the door in his face. Later, Judy allowed police to enter the house to see Courtney's room, but she became very nervous. The house was extremely cluttered, with piles of items covering all available space on counters. Courtney's room was also cluttered, and the mattress was bare, giving the impression that no one had lived there recently. At one point, Judy panicked when she lost sight of one of the detectives behind a closed door and ordered the investigators to leave. When Lesser asked to search the rest of the house for Courtney's child, Judy refused. A neighbor reported seeing Joshua, Judy, and one of Courtney's sisters leaving in a van with a child. Detective Lesser found it suspicious that Courtney, who suffered from a chronic illness, had not seen a doctor since October 2017. Her last prescription was in July 2018, although she had been receiving medications monthly before disappearing. Surveillance footage showed Joshua and Judy shopping with a small child. Cameras also captured they withdrawing money from Courtney's bank account on the day she was declared missing. By October 24th, Joshua and Judy had left their home. When police arrived to execute a search warrant, they found that the DVR from the home surveillance system had been removed, and the family's 6 pets were gone. Joshua and Judy's mobile numbers were deactivated in mid-November, but 2 new numbers with Texas area codes were activated on the same day. A month after the Holdens left, a neighbor called the police to report activity at the house. It was one of Judy's daughters and her husband, who had flown in from Texas to check on the property. They claimed they hadn't seen Courtney in 2 years and that Judy had retired. In mid-December, Joshua and Judy traveled to Texas, where they were eventually found by the police at Judy's daughter's house. Courtney's son was also present at the scene. Joshua and Judy Holden were arrested and charged with identity theft, interfering with child custody, and using Courtney's bank accounts without her permission. Fortunately, the child was found safe and was reunited with his father. No other family members were charged with any crimes. The police searched Judy's home in Spokane with search dogs but did not find any signs of Courtney. They also searched a home in Texas and a vehicle in Oklahoma, but these searches did not yield any clues about Courtney's whereabouts. Joshua, 40, and Judy, 74, were held in a Texas jail, where they refused to speak with police and fought extradition to Spokane. The authorities awaited a governor's warrant to bring them back, but since there was insufficient evidence to link them to Courtney's disappearance, they were likely released. This case remains one of the most puzzling missing person cases, with little progress made during the month-long investigation. The police have extensive notes on the case, but Judy and Joshua maintain their innocence in Courtney's disappearance. The police, however, suspect that Courtney is likely deceased, but they lack concrete evidence to prove it. It's tragic that Courtney was drawn into the Holden family, who failed to provide her with the love and support she desperately sought. Despite their mistreatment, Courtney wanted to believe they were her family and struggled to defend herself against their cruelty. The cruel reality is that there are many ways to secretly dispose of a body using chemicals that can evade detection by experts and police dogs, leaving Courtney's fate a heartbreaking mystery. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Graciela Graciela. Graciela Graciela was born on October 6, 19, in Mexico, to a working-class family who sought a better future for their children. To achieve this, her parents made the decision to immigrate to the United States, ultimately settling in Hermiston, Oregon. As Graciela was very young at the time of the move, she has no recollection of the challenges associated with relocating. Upon reaching school age, Graciela attended Umatilla High School, an institution that predominantly served students from low-income backgrounds. The school provided all students with free meals, reflecting the socioeconomic status of its student body, of which 66% were Hispanic. It was here that Graciela's sociable nature and innate charm enabled her to effortlessly form friendships among her peers. After graduating, she proceeded to enroll in the business department at Blue Mountain College. From a young age, Graciela had always dreamed of becoming a hairstylist and owning her own beauty salon. With determination and hard work, she believed she could make her dreams a reality. By February 2006, she had achieved her goal and became the owner of Cuz Beauty Salon. Graciela's talent and charisma quickly made her a well-known figure in society. As the salon's owner, she always presented herself well, which added to the salon's positive image. Her passion for her job and understanding of the latest beauty trends ensured a steady stream of clients. Over time, some of these clients became close friends, who were always welcome at her home. Graciela was highly respected in the town, not only for her professional success but also for her interesting and happy personal life. Her first love, with whom she had 2 daughters, Annabelle and Gabriella, also known as Gabby, was someone she met in her youth. Although the relationship didn't last long, and the father of her children left the family, Graciela didn't let this setback hold her back. Instead, she focused on self-improvement and continued to move forward as a single mother. Graciela later earned a degree in cosmetology. She then met a kind-hearted man of Mexican descent named Romero Sanchez, and they got married. Her children from a previous relationship reported that she never regretted this decision. Her husband was caring not only to her but also to her children, treating them as his own. The family later welcomed 2 more children, Arthur and Jacob. Although he had biological sons, Graciella's husband still affectionately referred to Annabelle and Gabriella as his girls. Gabby considered her stepfather to be her real father, as he consistently supported, protected, and cared for them. The couple prioritized keeping their family united and happy, raising 4 children together. This did not deter Graciella from pursuing her passion. Instead, she would often take her children with her to professional meetings. The family developed a lovely tradition of traveling together, exploring new cities, local attractions, and cultural features. They also prioritized staying connected to their roots, frequently visiting Mexico and enjoying quality time together. Everyone made a genuine effort to make each other happy. However, after 17 years of marriage, the couple decided to separate. Graciella and her ex-husband chose not to burden each other with their dwindling feelings, opting to preserve the respectful relationship they had built over the years. Even after the divorce, they maintained a warm and strong connection. The father remained involved in the children's lives, regularly seeing them and sharing custody of their youngest son with Graciella. The other children were grown and lived on their own, but they remained close to their parents. They would get together to celebrate holidays and often sought each other's advice. Graciella handled her divorce well, remaining optimistic and confident, thanks in part to her ex-husband's kind and understanding behavior during this challenging time. On November 9, 2019, Romero made an unexpected visit to Annabelle, Graciella's eldest daughter. Annabelle was surprised to see her mother's new husband show up unexpectedly. Romero told Annabelle that Graciella had disappeared. According to Romero, he and Graciella had met with Jacob the previous night. Afterward, Romero returned home and went to bed beside Graciella, who was already asleep. However, when he woke up in the morning, Graciella was gone. He searched the house but couldn't find her. Romero tried to contact Graciella by calling and texting her, but she didn't respond. He went to Annabelle's place hoping she might have some information about Graciella's disappearance. Annabelle, however, had no idea where her mother was. She was shocked not only by the news of her mother's disappearance but also by Romero's reaction. He was in tears and seemed genuinely upset. Annabelle found this odd because Romero had never shown any strong emotions around them before, only indifference. Romero mentioned that Graciella had been acting strangely and might have found someone else. He admitted she might have needed a break from their relationship and wasn't sure if she was truly happy with him. However, Annabelle found his words insincere and his tears overly dramatic. She started to worry about her mother and found Romero's behavior suspicious. Romero had previously avoided talking to Graciella's children, but suddenly reached out to them. After he left, Annabelle told the rest of the family what happened. They gathered at Graciella's house to figure out what was going on. Her car was still parked in the driveway, which was unusual since she would have likely taken it if she were leaving Romero. The house was also spotlessly tidy, which was out of character for Graciella, who preferred a more creative and chaotic space. If she were planning to leave, her belongings would have been scattered around the room. Graciella spent a considerable amount of time in front of the mirror, carefully selecting an outfit for the day. However, she surprisingly left all her treasured jewelry at home, including her favorite rings and necklaces that she wore daily. This unusual behavior raised concerns among her family members, who couldn't help but imagine worst-case scenarios, including the possibility of her fleeing. While searching the house, Gabby stumbled upon something peculiar, a large, heavy blanket in the washing machine. This was unusual because their mother, Graciella, always emphasized the importance of not overloading appliances. It was likely that Romero, who normally didn't participate in household chores, had washed the blanket. This sparked suspicion that he might be trying to conceal something. It was later discovered that along with Graciela, several important items had gone missing from the house, including her passport, driver's license, and mobile phone. On November 11th, Annabelle went to the police station to report her mother, Graciela, missing. However, she was surprised to find that Romero, Graciela's husband, had not informed the police about her disappearance, despite knowing about it since November 9th or possibly earlier. As a result, Annabelle became the first person to file a missing person report for her mother. Romero's distant personality had been a concern for Graciela's family since they met him. Graciela had met Romero at her beauty salon, where he was a client, after her divorce. Their initial friendship eventually developed into a romantic relationship. However, when Graciela introduced Romero to her family, they noticed his aloof and cold demeanor. Annabelle and her sister, Gabby, tried several times to connect with Romero, but he did not reciprocate, leaving Graciela's children puzzled by his behavior. They initially attributed it to individual personality differences, especially compared to their mother's previous relationships. They were eager to understand their mother's partner and what motivated him. At times, he seemed strange and aloof to them, and they struggled to comprehend how someone as lively and joyful as their mother could be drawn to someone so serious and reserved. Despite their reservations, they respected her decision. When their mother shared the news of her upcoming wedding, everyone rallied around her, particularly the girls, who wanted to see her happy and loved. On the wedding day, guests couldn't help but notice Romero's haughty demeanor and restraint. Some even perceived him as excessively possessive, as he dominated the bride's attention. When Graciela's young children came to congratulate the newlyweds, Romero responded with disdain rather than warmth and affection, making it clear that he didn't want to share his wife's attention with anyone, not even her own family. After that, Graciela's relatives struggled to hide their genuine opinions about Romero. Annabelle even went so far as to say she didn't consider him a stepfather, let alone a father figure. The family simply wanted to have a normal relationship, like those found in any civilized household. Following the wedding, Graciela and Romero moved in together, along with her youngest son Jacob, into Graciela's home. Jacob shared that shortly after the wedding, Romero started behaving as if he was the sole owner of the house. The boy recalled that the initial honeymoon phase was brief, and soon the family started to fall apart. He observed that his mother initially tried to establish personal boundaries, but being non-confrontational, she quickly gave in to Romero's demands. This seemed to suit Romero, who had a quick temper and never apologized first. To avoid creating tension in the household, Graciela often conceded to Romero's wishes. As time went on, it seemed she realized she had rushed into the marriage without fully thinking it through. In private conversations, Graciela confessed to feeling trapped and suffocated in the relationship. Her husband exerted control over her, never allowing her to go anywhere alone. Despite this, she never expressed any desire to leave the abusive relationship, suggesting she was still in love with Romero. Everyone realized that Graciela was in a relationship with the wrong person. It became apparent that her partner, Romero, was jobless and financially dependent on her. The Graciela family, who valued hard work, found it frustrating that Romero was always by Graciela's side without any apparent reason. Romero was a master manipulator who kept a close eye on Graciela, monitoring her interactions, including her friendships with other women. He would either prevent her from going out or show up unexpectedly, as if checking on her loyalty. His extreme jealousy was suffocating. Graciela felt embarrassed by his behavior, which led her to isolate herself socially, only interacting with her family. This had a negative impact on her professional life, as her job required frequent client meetings and attending industry events. Those close to Graciela noticed a significant change in her demeanor. She looked sad, worn out, and had lost her usual cheerfulness. It was clear that she was unhappy. Even her children observed the changes in her mood and appearance, as well as her loss of independence. They discussed their concerns among themselves and concluded that, although they didn't like Romero, he was Graciela's choice, and they had to respect her decisions. Other relatives shared the family's distrust of Romero. However, no one knew how to intervene or offer support. The couple's issues were serious enough to require professional help. Gabby had once suggested this to her mother, but Graciela insisted on handling her personal life independently. In 2018, Graciela suddenly announced that she would relocate her beauty salon to her home, citing convenience. Her family was skeptical, as she had never mentioned this plan before, despite running the salon for 12 years. Some clients noted that Romero often hung around the salon, creating tension and disrupting the usually warm atmosphere. While some thought Graciela made the move to solve a problem, others suspected that her jealous husband was behind the decision. Despite the initial doubts, Graciela remained enthusiastic about the change, saying it allowed her to spend more time with Jacob and Romero. By the end of 2018, she and her husband were remodeling a room for the salon, but the project took longer than expected and wasn't completed until May 2019. Although the salon was closed temporarily, Graciela's reputation remained intact, and rumors of the studio's reopening attracted a long queue of clients, including new ones, months in advance. Graciela was thrilled with her professional success but became increasingly private about her personal life. Return to the moment before of Graciela's disappearance. Another incident raised concerns about Graciela's safety. She asked her daughter Gabby to pick her up, which was unusual. But she claimed everything was fine and said she was just having a disagreement with her husband. When they met up, they spent time together and Graciela seemed to relax. She smiled and told Gabby not to worry, saying that couples' arguments are normal and can actually bring people closer together. Despite this, Gabby couldn't shake off her worries and remained uneasy about her mother's situation. After Annabelle contacted the police, the relationship between Graciela's family and Romero rapidly deteriorated. He offered an explanation for his wife's disappearance, suggesting that she might have wanted some time alone or could have left with another man, and he believed she would soon return. This was his standard response to anyone inquiring about the situation. However, the police took the report seriously and initiated an investigation, considering the possibility that Graciela could have been a victim of a crime. They began by searching her home, where they found that only a few personal items were missing, with nothing else seeming out of the ordinary. The police also interviewed Graciela's children, her husband, and others close to the family, including her ex-husband. Although everyone expressed skepticism about Romero's behavior, the investigation did not uncover any significant information. Romero cooperated with the detectives, allowing them to search his home, participating in interrogations, providing his DNA, and undergoing a polygraph test. Despite his cooperation, the police did not have sufficient grounds to arrest him, so the investigation continued. Analysis of Graciela's phone records revealed her last known location was near a bridge in Washington on November 9 at 12:30 p.m., when the signal stopped after her phone was turned off. Her bank accounts and social media remained inactive. Despite questioning hundreds of witnesses and checking all her frequent locations, investigators found no signs of her. The investigation deemed her disappearance suspicious due to the complete lack of evidence. For months into the investigation, the Hermiston police publicly stated that they had no confirmed information about Graciela's last sighting. Although Romero didn't report Graciela missing, the authorities didn't accuse him of anything. The police's stance frustrated Graciela's relatives, causing them to reduce communication with law enforcement. The family eventually stopped receiving weekly updates, forcing Graciela's children to contact the police station directly for information. As of March 2020, there were no new developments in Graciela's case. In an effort to revive the investigation, Graciella's family reached out to the media, hoping to raise public awareness and gather information. They believed even small details could be crucial. Gabby, a family member, expressed the family's frustration and disappointment with the police's lack of progress in the case. The Graciella family urged investigators to focus on finding Graciella, as they suspected foul play due to the state of her belongings and the unusual circumstances at home. It was unclear who would harm her, as she had no known enemies. Her family knew she wouldn't leave without contacting them, and the lack of communication suggested something was seriously wrong. The family also requested a new detective team, citing concerns of bias and collusion with Romero, whom they believed was somehow connected to the case. The family pointed out numerous inconsistencies in the investigation. It was found that Romero's phone had been turned off on the day his wife went missing, and his actions didn't seem like those of someone who was worried about a loved one disappearing suddenly. The Graciella family asked for Romero to be arrested. Police Chief Jason Edmiston quickly responded to these claims. He agreed that Mrs. Graciella's disappearance seemed suspicious and might involve something criminal. He said this was just one idea, but promised that the investigation would stay fair and be based on evidence and facts. Edmiston also denied that Romero had any connections to the police that might affect the case. Edmiston mentioned that false information was spreading and making the investigation harder. He said the case was ongoing and that some information had to be kept secret. The police also asked the FBI for help. Edmiston expressed frustration that people were criticizing the police without understanding how complicated the law is. At the same time, Gabby started a fundraiser to hire a private investigator. This move was seen as criticism of how the police were handling the case, suggesting they weren't doing their job well. 1 year after Graciella's disappearance, her family and friends held a memorial event to honor her memory and pray for her safe return. They lit candles and posted signs outside the police station, urging authorities to continue searching for her. In September 2023, a significant development in the case occurred when Romero Sanchez, Graciella's husband, was severely injured in an attack. There was speculation that Mason Graciella, Graciella's brother, was involved in the incident, but details and any potential consequences for Mason were not disclosed. It appeared that Graciella's family had become frustrated with the police's lack of progress in investigating Romero, leading to a potentially frightening outcome. Graciella's disappearance remains an unsolved mystery, leaving her family in unbearable uncertainty that's taking a devastating toll on their health. Her children are left with only prayers, hoping for clarity and justice, unsure if she's alive.